owner of the US Mega Farmest Videos Purimont Para Intratnamiento Wino Infringed de Recos de Autoriales. Los de Recos de la Novela y la Imagen son del autor original, no reclamamos propiedad. No te gusta esperar y quieres escuchar este fanfic completo ahora? Suscríbete a nuestro Patreon, donde encontrarás los mejores fanfics. Chapter 726 Departure. Early in the morning, the golden sunlight shone into the empty bedroom through the French windows. Kinzu stretched himself, put on his nightgown and came to the window, pulled open the thick curtains, and looked at the fairy tale scene outside. This sudden heavy snow has been falling intermittently for 2 days, and it has completely stopped today. On the pine tree outside the window, little Jerry got up early, stood on the branch bent by the snow, and stretched lazily. The sunlight shone on its fiery red hair, faintly flashing golden light. Under the tree, the little guys who have developed a habit started a new day of morning exercises under the leadership of Eva. However, Kinzu's eyes only swept over the little guys, and focused on today's leader, the cowgirl Eva, who was full of youthful vitality. Maybe because she was a little hot from running, Eva did not wear bloated winter clothes, but a simple knitted sweater. Although this beige sweater has no special style, it perfectly shows Eva's graceful figure. Especially as she keeps running, her golden hair sways from side to side, which is very eye-catching. As if she noticed someone was watching her, Eva suddenly raised her head while jogging, and saw Kinzu's shining eyes through the glass. "Hey, Clean, come down and run together." She waved to the upstairs, and a smile appeared on Eva's face. Under the reflection of the morning sun, that faint smile was so touching that Kinzu was a little dazed for a while. After a while, Kinzu smiled bitterly and shook his head. It was indeed a long time since I had been intimate with this goblin. Now she is getting bolder and bolder. It seems that I have to find an opportunity to deal with her. Turning and walking into the bathroom, after taking care of his hygiene, Kinzu changed into Gucci's new winter clothes and walked out of the room. As for Zumengyo, this girl has been tormented by Kinzu and has become accustomed to sleeping late. Well, or rather, if Kinzu hadn't had something to do today, he wouldn't have planned to get up. After all, it's so comfortable in the quilt in the middle of winter. Especially, with a beautiful woman by his side, most men don't want to get up. Just as he came to the living room, Eva came in from outside. Her figure revealing beige knitted top made the dull living room seem a little lively. Turning his head to look upstairs, seeing that there was no movement, Kinzu didn't care about anything and directly pushed Eva down on the sofa. "Hey, Clean, what are you doing so early in the morning?" Eva was not afraid of the sudden attack. Instead, she hooked her hands around Kinzu's neck and looked at him with a smile on her face. "Little devil, let me see how I deal with you today." After panting and saying this, Kinzu picked up Eva by the waist and walked straight to the activity room on the first floor under the curious eyes of several little guys. It's good to have a big villa, so you don't have to move anything. While walking, Kinzu was still sighing in his heart about the benefits of a big house. However, at this time, Eva in his arms began to panic. The current situation was somewhat beyond her expectations. "Clean, what are you doing? It's still daytime." Kinzu didn't say anything. He came to the door of the activity room, pushed open the door and walked in. The area of this activity room is not small, and there are many fun things in it, so Kinzu often comes to take a look when he has nothing to do. In the activity room, there are not only bowling alleys, indoor tennis courts, but also many fitness equipment. When he first saw these fitness equipment, Kinzu secretly speculated in his heart whether the previous owner of the villa was also a fitness enthusiast. However, none of this is important now. Looking down at Eva, who was a little flustered in his arms, Kinzu showed a smug smirk at the corner of his mouth. On the empty and lonely interstate highway, a steel behemoth that was wild yet delicate was moving at lightning speed. In the driver's seat of the night the 15th, Dale looked through the review mirror and saw Kinzu rubbing his waist, her silver teeth almost broken. This damn guy actually made her sister do such an unbearable action. If her sister hadn't stalked him, she would have wanted to beat this guy up. Thinking of the scene she saw when she broke into the activity room in the morning, even though Dale lived in the open America, she couldn't help but blush and her heart beat fast. No matter who it is, no matter how high his skills are, if he is distracted, he will definitely not do a good job. So, the night the 15th is now on the interstate highway, making an S-curve forward, causing a pink Maserati following behind to want to overtake but dare not, so it can only follow behind in frustration. "Hey, Dale, drive carefully." Hearing the crazy horn sound coming from behind, Kinzu couldn't help but lean forward and patted Dale on the shoulder. Ah! Dale's hands trembled due to the sudden attack, and she almost drove that car into the ditch. Kinzu, who was caught off guard, inevitably dodged and almost hit his head on the car door. Rubbing his painful forehead, Kinzu scolded dissatisfiedly. Ah, what? I told you to drive carefully. I don't want Eva to come to worship us next year. Oh, boss, I know. Maybe it was because of Kinzu's serious tone, or maybe it was because the car was not driven well just now, which caused Kinzu to hit it. Anyway, Dale is a little guilty now. At this time, she didn't look like she was gritting her teeth just now. Instead, she was as obedient as a kitten. Kinzu was stunned by her tone. He opened his mouth, but couldn't say the rest of the words. Erica next to him shook her head helplessly. Although she didn't know why Dale was like this, she was obviously not suitable for driving in her current state. Dale, please pull over and let me drive. Dale did not object when she heard this. She was not fit to drive in her current state. After looking at the rearview mirror and making sure that no one was directing her, Dale turned the steering wheel and came to the emergency lane. As soon as Kinzu gave way, the Maserati behind seized the opportunity and rushed up. When passing by Kinzu and the others, the speed of the Maserati also slowed down, and the window glass slowly opened. Kinzu took a look in surprise and found that there were two young and beautiful white girls sitting in this pink Maserati. However, at this time, their attitude was not very friendly. They were raising their white arms and pointing their middle fingers at Kinzu. Obviously, they were a little angry because they had been following behind all the way. Chapter 727 Douglas Arsenal. Until the Maserati drove away quickly, Kinzu was still a little dazed. He was actually despised by others. And, two fair and tender little girls. But, why do these two girls look familiar? Touching his chin, Kinzu thought back thoughtfully, trying to see if he could remember where he had seen these two girls. But after thinking for a long time, until the car started again, Kinzu came back to his senses. If he couldn't remember, he wouldn't think about it. Kinzu took his thoughts back and glared at Dale fiercely, considering whether to deal with her as well. Not only did he scare herself by suddenly breaking into the activity room in the morning, but now he also made herself despised by others. Being stared at by Kinzu, Dale felt a little guilty for some reason. She didn't know what was wrong with her. Ever since she accidentally caught this guy and her sister doing something in the morning, she always felt a little uncomfortable when facing him again. Could it be that a thief is guilty? But she is not a thief. Ignoring her complicated thoughts, Kinzu rubbed his head and closed his eyes in the back seat to rest. There was no way. After so much hard work in the morning and so many difficult moves, my waist was a little sore. Under Erica's control, the speed of night the 15th was not too fast. Until they arrived in New York, there was no sign of the pink Maserati. This also made Kinzu's idea of getting back at the scene completely fall through. When he arrived in New York, Kinzu did not rush to the arsenal, but found a hotel to stay in. He did not plan to get things done so quickly, so he could not treat himself badly. After everything was settled, Kinzu took Dale and Erica out of the hotel. After leaving the hotel, the three of them seemed to be here for a trip, wandering leisurely in the streets and alleys of Queens, New York. They did not go to a restaurant specifically for lunch. They walked along the way and bought anything that looked delicious without hesitation. The delicious food was naturally eaten with satisfaction, and the unpalatable food, Kinzu directly handed it to Dale beside him and asked her to throw it away. Ahem, this little thing, just treat it as a punishment for her. Kinzu didn't feel that he had done anything wrong at all, thinking with confidence. After strolling through several busy pedestrian streets, Kinzu and the other two drove to the Douglas Arsenal in the suburbs. Yes, this arsenal is still the property of the Doug family. It was only after asking Carl that he knew that the Doug group was actually involved in military manufacturing. Shaking his head, Kinzu took out his mobile phone and called Douglas. Hi, Clean, long time no see, you are willing to come out of that remote place? As soon as the call was connected, Douglas' hearty laughter came over. Listening to his ridicule, Kinzu smiled helplessly. Only people like them would think that Revere was a remote place, right? Doug, I haven't seen you for so long, you are still so leisurely. I'm rushing to your arsenal now. Oh? What are you going there for? Douglas, who was on the other side of the phone, sat up straight with some doubts. Arsenal. That is the most important industry of their family. Kinzu smiled, briefly explained the matter, and finally said, how is it? Come over and give me some reference. After listening to Kinzu's introduction, Douglas was shocked beyond words. He really didn't expect that Kinzu's current methods were so wild that he could even get the active Black Hawk. The most important thing is that he can even install weapons. However, these thoughts only flashed through Douglas's mind. After hearing Kinzu's question, he immediately smiled and said, "Of course, wait, I'll be there soon." After hanging up the phone, Douglas sat on the soft leather sofa and began to think carefully. He was still quite curious about how Kinzu got a Black Hawk helicopter. Because even for him, although it was easy to get a Black Hawk, it was not easy to do it legally. However, after thinking for a long time, he still couldn't figure it out. Looking at the time, it was almost time, so he got up, walked outside, picked up his phone, and called the person in charge of his arsenal. Anyway, since Kinzu called him, he must not be left waiting when he got there. This was also the purpose of Kinzu's call. If it was just to buy an ordinary thing, Kinzu would not think of bothering others. Because there was no need. What debt is the most difficult to repay in the world? It must be the debt of favor. It's very comfortable to use others now, and when someone wants to use him one day, he will definitely need to repay him. However, there is nothing he can do about it. Kinzu sighed helplessly. After all, he went directly to the arsenal to buy things, which is not like a gun store. Because they are not engaged in retail, if you go directly to their door, they probably won't pay you any attention. So what if you were a billionaire? As long as you don't buy weapons in large quantities from him, they can still ignore you. Soon, after more than half an hour's drive, Knight the 15th stopped at the gate of a factory that looked like a vast industrial park. Wow, this is quite impressive. After getting off the car, Kinzu couldn't help but smack his lips at the sight of the imposing factory gate and the armed security guard at the sentry box. Dale, who got off the car with him, finally recovered at this time. When she heard Kinzu's muttering, she couldn't help but smile. Of course, boss, the guns and ammunition produced by Duck Group were equipped in our special forces at the time. Oh? Kinzu looked back at Dale in surprise and asked, does the special forces use their weapons? Erica on the side also nodded and agreed with a smile, yes, the strength of this arsenal is still very strong. They have everything from guns and ammunition to missiles and tanks. Listening to the two female bodyguards talking in high spirits, Kinzu was more and more surprised. For such a large group, would there ever be such an approachable guy? Although this guy is not the first there, the heir of the Duck Group, even if he ranks lower, should not be so humble. However, Kinzu couldn't figure it out, and Kinzu would often choose not to dwell on things he couldn't figure out. Perhaps, some guys are born to be so easy to talk to. Just as he was comforting himself, the factory door slowly opened, and a young white man with blonde hair and blue eyes walked out quickly. After roughly scanning the door, the white man found Kinzu and the other two, so he ran over quickly. Chapter 728 Harrison. Hello, are you Mr. Clean? The white man came to a few meters in front of Kinzu and the others, and stopped. He cast his eyes on the only male among the three and asked in a respectful tone. Kinzu nodded, knowing that this should be the person sent by Douglas to pick him up, and smiled and said, I am Kinzu, I wonder who you are. Hearing Kinzu's admission, the white man immediately showed a bright smile on his face, and replied respectfully, Hello, Mr. Clean, I am Harrison Camp, the Assistant General Manager of Douglas Arsenal. Our General Manager is not in the company now, so he specially asked me to come to greet you. Kinzu was a little surprised to hear this, and he didn't expect that it would be the Assistant General Manager who came to greet him. Although the position of Assistant General Manager does not seem that important. But in fact, anyone who can sit in this seat is usually a favorite of the General Manager. Because this position is originally for him to serve, if he is not happy with you, he will not let you stay by his side all day. The thoughts flashed through his mind. Kinzu smiled and stretched out his hand to shake hands with him, and said politely, Mr. Harrison, it's nice to meet you. Harrison also quickly stretched out his hand to shake hands with Kinzu, and said with a respectful smile, Mr. Clean, let's go in first, and talk while walking. Although he was a little surprised that the person in front of him was a Chinese, he was more curious now. What was the purpose of this Chinese man who looked younger than him coming here? To help some regions purchase arms? Or did he want to buy them back at a low price and then sell them? The second possibility seemed a bit unrealistic to him. He would rather believe that the guy in front of him was pushed out by others to attract other people's attention. But unfortunately, all his guesses were wrong. Just as the two of them were about to enter the factory that seemed like an industrial park, the roar of a car engine came from the side. In Kinzu's surprised eyes, a limited edition yellow fairy, with a beautiful emergency brake and tail swing, stopped steadily not far from him. The car door opened, and Douglas, wearing a camel-colored cashmere coat, walked up with a smile on his face. "Hey, Clean, you're really fast." After giving Kinzu a hug, Douglas smiled and teased. "No, you should be the one who's faster, right?" Kinzu looked at the cool sports car not far away, shook his head and sighed deliberately. "Such a good car, how could it fall into your hands? You're ruining it." Douglas scolded him with a smile and punched him, then asked in confusion, "You've been here for a while, right? Why don't you go in?" Then, his eyes stopped on Harrison on the side, and asked in surprise, "This guy won't let you in?" Although Douglas said this lightly, it was no less than an earthquake in Harrison's ears, so he quickly waved his hand and explained, No, Mr. Doug, I was sent by the general manager to meet Mr. Clean, and we're about to go in." Harrison never thought that this unprepossessing Chinese boy in front of him not only knew his general manager, but also knew the general manager of the group company. Although both of them were general managers, he was the general manager of a group, and all the subsidiaries, big and small, were under his control. However, this guy is not a stupid person. After a little thought, he realized that the Chinese in front of him was probably following the path of General Manager Doug. As for the general manager of his own company, after hearing Mr. Doug's instructions, it was fine. Asking him to come and greet him was already a very face-giving thing. After hearing Harrison's explanation, Douglas turned his head and looked at Kinzu. His eyes seemed to reveal a questioning meaning. Kinzu nodded and agreed. "Doug, Mr. Harrison is right. We were just about to go in, and you came." Seeing Kinzu say this, Douglas laughed heartily. "That's perfect, let's go in. The general manager here is not here today, so I will personally accompany you for a tour. This, Doug, it won't delay your work, right?" Kinzu said hesitantly. Douglas waved his hand indifferently. "What's the delay? It's just right for me to be lazy. Let's go in." As he said that, Douglas took the lead. Kinzu saw this and had no choice but to follow him, but he felt that this guy was really a good friend. Under Harrison's guidance, Douglas led Kinzu and his group and rushed directly into the office of the Arsenal headquarters. After entering a reception room, Douglas sat down first and ordered Harrison, "Go and call 2 weapons experts over, and ask them to bring a copy of the Black Hawk's data." Harrison agreed and turned around and walked out of the meeting room. Kinzu sat on the leather sofa, crossed his legs comfortably, and said with a smile, "Doug, I really didn't realize that your family's business is so big." Douglas took a sip of the coffee handed over by the secretary, and said with a smile, "Clean, I've said it, you can't stay in that place where no one lives all day, and you don't even know our Dut group." Touching his nose, Kinzu laughed twice. He really didn't care what Dut group did. However, he couldn't admit his ignorance at this time, so he smiled and shrugged. "Doug, you're wronging me. Of course I have heard of Dut group, but seeing is believing after all." Douglas pointed at Kinzu with his hand, but did not say anything. Instead, he asked curiously, "Let's not talk about this. You haven't told me it. How did you get the Black Hawk? I still can't get one to fly myself." Kinzu curled his lips in disdain when he heard this. "Doug, keep fooling around. You can't do it. It's just that you don't have this hobby." Now it was Douglas' turn to be embarrassed. He scratched his head and said helplessly, "Okay, I admit that I really have no interest." Then, he changed the subject and said with a smile, "Besides, even if I do it, it's not an easy task." Kinzu knew what he wanted to know, so he didn't keep him in suspense. He took a sip of coffee to moisten his throat, and then smiled and briefly told him what happened. After listening to Kinzu's explanation, Douglas was a little stunned, looking at Kinzu with an expression as if he had seen a ghost. "What? The guy who saved Prince Hunter is actually you?" Chapter 729 finalized. Douglas was still a little stunned when Harrison led 2 white men who were over 50 and slightly overweight into the conference room. That was a prince. Although he was also a leader in the upper class, he was not as good as the prince. Douglas looked at Kinzu with envy. He wished he could switch identities with him. With the friendship of a prince, would he still have to worry about his future? What's more, there was more than one prince. Thinking of the rumors, the one who accompanied Prince Hunter on the trip was one of the richest people in the world. "Mr. Doug, Mr. Carl Adam, and Mr. Cosmo Walker are here." Seeing that Douglas was stunned and didn't say anything, Harrison had to bite the bullet and remind him. Oh. Awakened by the sudden sound, Douglas came back to his senses and nodded to the two white men with a smile. "Mr. Carl, Mr. Cosmo, please take a seat first." After several people sat down one after another, Douglas sorted out his thoughts and crossed his hands on the table. "It's like this, gentlemen, I have a Black Hawk with its weapons dismantled. Now I want to re-equip it with weapons. What do you think I need?" After listening to Douglas, the two looked at each other, picked up the information they brought in front of them and looked at it. Then Cosmo spoke. "General Manager, this matter is very simple. You just need to send the plane over. The weapons here are already made. Just install them." Douglas nodded slightly, and then asked, "Is there only one weapon? There is no other choice?" "This." Cosmo pondered for a moment, and whispered a few words with Carl, and shook his head helplessly. "General Manager, the Black Hawk was originally a transportation aircraft. When the weapon system was originally designed, it was only considered to have simple self-protection capabilities, so 2 heavy machine guns are enough." Hearing him say this, Douglas looked at Kinzu. After all, he was not the protagonist today. Kinzu didn't have anything to say. He nodded, then looked at Cosmo and asked with a smile, "Mr. Cosmo, can I ask what kind of heavy machine gun it is?" Although Kinzu is Chinese and doesn't look very old, Cosmo, who is probably sitting at the conference table and is very experienced, certainly wouldn't be stupid enough to think that Kinzu is a follower or something. So after hearing Kinzu's question, Cosmo smiled and nodded at him, and then introduced, "Sir, the military version of the Black Hawk is originally equipped with 2 Gatling and 143 6-barreled aircraft machine guns. This heavy machine gun, also known as a Gatling cannon, is a weapon with a very high rate of fire. Due to the use of the machine gun principle, their maximum rate of fire can reach 6,000 rounds per minute. At the same time, due to the adjustable speed of the DC motor, their rate of fire can also be freely adjusted from 300 rounds per minute to 6,000 rounds per minute." After listening to Cosmo's introduction, Kinzu's eyes were about to light up. This is not a simple heavy machine gun, it must be a killer. With this, let alone an ordinary small fishing boat, even if a small warship comes, I can suppress it. Okay, that's it. After the excitement, Kinzu cast his eyes on Douglas, smiled and nodded. "Doug, that's it, I'll ask them to send it over tomorrow." Douglas smiled. "Okay, that's it, tomorrow you come over and call Harrison directly, and let him accompany you to do these things." Kinzu heard this, and did not refuse. He looked at Harrison on the side and nodded gently. Then, "Mr. Harrison, I will trouble you again tomorrow. Mr. Keen is too polite. It is my honor to serve you." Listening to Kinzu's polite words, Harrison nodded hurriedly, and the smile on his face was even brighter than that flower. Kinzu smiled, and after expressing his gratitude to the 2 old professors together with Douglas, they walked out of the meeting room together. "How about it? I'll arrange it in the evening." Douglas looked at the time and said to Kinzu with a smile. Kinzu thought about it and declined. He smiled and said, "Next time, it's not easy for me to come here once. I'd better go see my little lover." Douglas immediately raised his middle finger to Kinzu and said contemptuously, "Clean, I just found out that you're still a guy who values love over friendship." Kinzu shrugged indifferently and said teasingly, "I don't know you. At night, your schedule is much fuller than mine. You should go and do your own things." Douglas sighed. What Kinzu said was not wrong. He really had a lot of schedules at night. Seeing Kinzu said so, he didn't force it anymore and said with a smile, "Okay, Clean, I won't bother you. You can come and find Harrison directly tomorrow. I won't come here anymore." After waving his hand and watching Douglas get on the limited edition ferry and speed away, Kinzu turned around and got into his own car. Dale, who had been listening to the 2 people's conversation just now, started the car and drove out without Kinzu's instructions. Arriving downstairs at Onid's house, Kinzu looked at the 2 of them, smiled and waved his hand. "Okay, you don't have to follow me, go back and have a good rest, I will call you if there is anything." The 2 of them didn't say anything, nodded, watched Kinzu walk into the community, and then rushed away. Going upstairs and knocking on the door, only to hear a question from you, and then the doors quickly opened. At the same time as the door opened, a body emitting a fiery breath also jumped into Kinzu's arms. "Oh, God, am I saying right, Clean? You still know how to come here?" Hearing the words of the beauty with a hint of sarcasm, Kinzu was rarely embarrassed, and smiled awkwardly. "Well, Mobuka, let's go in and talk." After saying that, without waiting for her to object, he put his arm around the beauty's slender waist and walked into the room impatiently. In the living room, another hot chocolate beauty also looked at the two people who walked in with shining eyes. "Onid, it's been so long since we last met. Are you okay?" Kinzu smiled brightly as he looked at Onid, who was wearing loose home clothes but had a hot body and slightly brown skin. Onid, who was a little excited at first, immediately felt embarrassed when Kinzu looked at her like this. "Clean, you haven't eaten yet? I'll go prepare dinner." After looking at the two people hugging each other with some ambiguity, Onid turned around and wanted to sneak to the kitchen after saying this. She knew very well what kind of embarrassing thing would happen next if she didn't leave. Extra update for the leader who rides a pig to the grassland, 15/20, chapter 730 arrival. The next day, the lazy sunshine shone on the earth, and the city became busy early in the morning. When Kinzu was wrapped in a thin blanket, still immersed in the gentleness of the two big horses, deeply unable to extricate himself, he was awakened by an annoying mobile phone ring. Rubbing his sleepy eyes, pulling his hands out of the warm and fragrant shade, Kinzu touched the phone and opened it. He answered it unhappily and complained, "Hey, Dale, if you don't give me a reasonable reason, be careful that I will punish you when I go back." Dale on the opposite side was slightly stunned. Although he didn't understand what punishment was, he knew it was definitely not a good word. So, the big foreign horse, who was in a bad mood, reported without any emotion in his voice, "Boss, Aya has already driven the Black Hawk to this side, and they will arrive soon." After a pause, Dale said with a hint of sarcasm, "Of course, if you don't want them to keep hovering over New York, you need to find a place for her to land in an hour." "So early?" Kinzu, who was not quite awake, muttered subconsciously. "Didn't I ask her to come again in the afternoon yesterday?" It seemed that he was stumped by Kinzu's words. After he finished speaking, the phone fell into silence. Just when Kinzu was a little confused, he heard Dale on the other side say faintly, "Boss, it's already 1 o'clock in the afternoon." "What, 1 o'clock?" Kinzu was stunned, took the phone away from his ear and looked at it. "Isn't it? It's already 1 o'clock in the afternoon." "Well, come and pick me up quickly. Have you eaten lunch?" Kinzu, who was a little embarrassed, pushed the two girls beside him to wake up, and got up and put on his clothes. As if she also noticed Kinzu's embarrassment, Dale agreed neatly and decisively, then hung up the phone. When Kinzu finished washing up, said goodbye to the two satisfied big horses, and walked downstairs in high spirits, more than half an hour had passed. Night the 15th was waiting downstairs. Kinzu didn't hesitate to open the car door and got in. "Let's go, find a place to eat first, and then rush over there." Dale looked at the time, didn't say anything, and started the car directly. Although Kinzu said to find a place to eat, he finally bought something and filled his stomach in the car. There was no way, time was really running out. Ween had called and said that the two were almost in New York. In desperation, he had to tell Dale to go directly to the arsenal. Although Kinzu didn't have the address and the longitude and latitude of the arsenal, he couldn't resist the high technology now. Not long after Kinzu arrived at the gate of the arsenal, Aya, who came according to the location, had already arrived above the arsenal. Looking up at the Black Hawk hovering in the air, Harrison gave Kinzu a thumbs up, and then hurried to command the ground, preparing to clear a place for them to land the helicopter. The two weapons experts from yesterday also rushed over from not far away at this time. When they saw Kinzu, they greeted him enthusiastically. There was no way not to be enthusiastic. The general manager of the head office he saw yesterday was the young master of the Douglas family. He could be so close to his boss's boss, so what was he? So when they saw Kinzu today, the two weapons experts were very humble. After a while, under Harrison's command, the Black Hawk slowly landed in the open space. The hatch opened, and the two sisters, Aya and Ween, walked down together. At this moment, Kinzu could clearly feel that the eyes of the people around him looked at him differently again. There was no way, the staff of the arsenal was still mostly men. Now, seeing so many women with amazing figures and good looks, they all stood up straight involuntarily, as if they were being inspected by their leaders. Kinzu didn't care about that. He looked at Cosmo beside him and asked with a smile, "How is it?" "Mr. Cosmo, why don't you go up and take a look first?" Cosmo didn't refuse. If he didn't go up, it would be hard for him to tell how to install it. With Carl, Cosmo, accompanied by Erica, walked straight to the helicopter. "Boss, what are you doing?" Ween was a bit restless. Seeing that everyone was busy, she came over curiously to ask. Kinzu didn't hide anything and told the general story with a smile. After listening to Kinzu's explanation, Aya and Ween opened their mouths wide. Ween even asked with some stammering, Boss, are you serious? Do you really want to install heavy weapons? Of course, Kinzu nodded proudly, revealing a disdainful tone, and said, Ween, what's the big deal about installing heavy weapons? One day, the boss will install a missile for you. Although Ween's eyes were shining, she was still very disdainful of Kinzu's next words. Missiles? That's something you can encounter. Unless it's another kind of missile. Thinking about it, Ween's little face floated with a touch of red clouds, looking very cute. Before Kinzu recovered from the charming little face, Cosmo got off the Black Hawk and strode towards this side. Mr. Clean, the situation is very good. We can start directly. Okay, then you guys start. I'll go check out the others, okay? Kinzu nodded slightly, said with a smile, and strolled aside. Following Cosmo's order, 2 machines drove over, and many workers began to get busy one after another. Kinzu just watched for a while, and was invited by Harrison to wait in the conference room. The dust over there is really a bit big. It's more comfortable to stay here. Sitting on the spacious leather sofa in the reception room, Harrison chatted with Kinzu for no reason. Kinzu smiled and nodded, and then listened to Harrison continue to ask, Mr. Clean, you have installed the weapons, do you want to prepare some ammunition? As he said, for fear that Kinzu would forget, he reminded, this is a 6-barrel heavy machine gun that can fire 6,000 rounds of bullets per minute. Kinzu then remembered that the 6-barrel heavy machine gun was indeed useful, but its consumption was really extraordinary. Even if a bullet only cost 3 cents, Kinzu would have to pay $180 for it for 1 minute. Okay, this is indeed a big consumer of bullets, so when we leave later, just prepare a few boxes for me. Harrison smiled and nodded in agreement. This was originally an opportunity to do a favor. What? The arsenal doesn't do retail? Well, maybe if ordinary people come, the arsenal really won't do retail. But there are so many Franklins. In a money society, there is really nothing that money can't do. If there is, then double it. Si est escuchando esta novela en un canal distinto a mundo fanfic novelas, significat lo descarga and y subir en cines fuerzos invitamos cordialmente a visitar nuestro canal. Mundo fanfic novelas all encontras la versión original de esta historia y podrás explorar muchas otras novelas de diversos narradores. Te esperamos para sumergirte en un mundo de novelas incredibles. Chapter 731 Missile Launcher. In the evening, the afterglow of the setting sun floated on the sea, blowing with the wind, creating a sparkling sound. Next to the Golden Beach, a European-style mansion covering a large area was hidden in the white snow, as if it had merged with the boundless snowfield. At the door of the mansion, which was as luxurious as the presidential palace, there was a graceful figure, lazily leaning on a lounge chair under the porch. With picturesque eyebrows and wearing a beige cashmere coat, Zumengyo held a cup of hot tea in her jade hands and smiled at 2 little huskies with snow-colored hair, who were constantly fighting for a small piece of apple. However, although her eyes seemed to be staring at the little huskies, if you look closely, you will find that her eyes are completely out of focus. Buzz buzz buzz. With a roar, Zumengyo, who was in a state of relaxation, woke up and looked up into the air with some surprise. In the calm sky, a helicopter with metallic glitters slowly approached under the afterglow of the setting sun. However, after seeing the shape of the helicopter clearly, Zumengyo's beautiful eyebrows could not help but wrinkle. Why is it different? Could it be? Zumengyo muttered to herself in confusion for a few words, and stood up, but her eyes were still staring at the helicopter quietly. It was not until the helicopter slowly stopped, the door opened, and the familiar figure appeared in front of her again that Zumengyo's brows relaxed and she happily went to meet him. Clean, you're back. Have you finished your work? Kinzu got off the plane, hugged Zhu, who came to meet him, lowered his head and sniffed her flowing hair, and said with a smile, Of course, I came back as soon as I finished it, dear. Did you miss me? Suddenly, being asked such a direct question by Kinzu in front of so many people, Zumengyo's pretty face immediately flushed. She was a woman of modesty, and was not used to showing affection in front of so many people. However, after listening to Kinzu's affectionate words, she could not say no, so she could only hum softly as an answer. Hee, dear, I thought about it too. Come on, give me a kiss. Kinzu smiled. He did not care about other people's eyes, kissed the beautiful Zhu on the pretty face, then hugged her around the waist, who was a little shy, and walked towards the villa with a big laugh. He could not help but be happy. After such a modification, the Black Hawk can now be regarded as a non-helicopter. Not only does it have two 12.7mm caliber 6-barrel heavy machine guns, but also 2 rows of missile launchers are installed on both sides. Of course, this is definitely not used to launch real missiles. After all, Kinzu is not qualified yet. Missiles and heavy machine guns are two completely different concepts. Since you can't launch real missiles, why do you install this launcher? This was the first question asked by the beautiful Zhu after listening to Kinzu's introduction. Kinzu smiled mysteriously. We can't launch real missiles, but we can launch fake ones. Fake? Sitting in Kinzu's arms, Zhu Mengyu opened her beautiful big eyes and looked at him curiously. Kinzu didn't say anything, but took out a colorful brochure from his bag and handed it to him. Fire tool guide. Why are you showing this to me? After taking the brochure, Zhu Mengyu became even more curious. Take a look yourself first and see if my dear can find it. Kinzu had a smirk on his face and didn't say it. Seeing that Kinzu was not going to say anything, the beautiful Zhu snorted proudly and began to flip through the pages one by one. Hey, this is, before turning a few pages, Zhu Mengyu was stunned there, pointing to a product introduction in the brochure, and said in surprise, Clean, is this it? Ha, I told you, my dear is the smartest. Kinzu laughed at this, looked at Zhu Mengyu's slightly open mouth, lowered his head, and printed it again. After a while, the breathless Zhu pushed Kinzu away. After a few quick breaths, Zhu regained her composure and looked at him coquettishly. Bad guy, you want to suffocate me to death. Kinzu laughed and teased, my dear, you can't do this. You can't stand it for such a short time. It seems that we need to practice more. Zhu Mengyu rolled her eyes charmingly and ignored Kinzu's nonsense, but looked at the brochure in her hand curiously. Is this really useful? It won't explode. Of course it does. Kinzu hugged the beauty and gave a very affirmative answer. However, Zhu Mengyu still looked at him with some doubts, waiting for his further explanation. The reason why Zhu Mengyu didn't believe it was because it was too unbelievable. The brochure that Kinzu showed her introduced a missile for firefighting. That's right, it's a firefighting missile. As the name suggests, this is a missile used to put out fires. Normally, firefighting missiles use ordinary launchers. Since the missiles themselves are equipped with radio direction finders, they can monitor the details of every fire point on the fire scene. Therefore, once a fire occurs, just press the launcher and the missile will take off and fly directly to the scene of the accident. It is easy to use and powerful. But this is exactly what Zhu Dame is confused about. There are no high-rise buildings on her side, and it is also close to the sea. You said that floods are possible, but fires are not very realistic, right? Facing Zhu Dame's puzzled eyes, Kinzu smiled lightly, took the brochure in her hand, and explained it to her in detail. In fact, he asked Harrison this question 3 hours ago. It was under Harrison's explanation that he decided to install these 2 rows of launchers. Although there are no high-rise buildings on his side, it is unlikely that a fire will occur. But firefighting missiles are not necessarily only for firefighting. Let's not talk about its impact force, just talk about its precision strike capability, that really hits wherever it points. Moreover, it has a long range. Not only can it break glass easily, but it can also release the dry powder fire extinguishing agent compressed in the body in an instant. Think about it, if we had this thing last time, we wouldn't have to take the risk of getting close to them and shooting at them with weapons. At this point, Kinzu sighed helplessly. Don't think that he could easily suppress the guys on the fishing boat last time, that was only because they were all ordinary fishermen, and the most amazing was an ordinary veteran. After all, the United States is a country with rampant guns. You have guns on your side, and others have guns on their side. And everyone's shooting range is about the same. If someone with good shooting skills comes over, he can kill your driver with 1 shot, or shoot through your engine with 1 shot. Then in the vast ocean, you really don't know how you died. Recommend 2 new books to friends, Urban God Level Demon Lord and Reborn in the City. I'm Yang Jian. Friends who are interested can go and have a look. That's it for today. The rest of the update will come tomorrow. My eyes hurt so much, I'm going to sleep first. Chapter 732a. Sudden phone call. Kinzu and Zhu Mengyu didn't dwell on the missile for long. They had already bought the things, and Zhu Mengyu was just curious about whether it was useful. After snuggling on the sofa for a while, Eva came over from the kitchen and said with a smile, Clean, dinner is ready. Shall we go now? Kinzu nodded, picked up the beautiful Zhu beside him, and walked to the restaurant with Eva. Perhaps to celebrate Kinzu's return, Eva prepared a rich dinner, which made Kinzu, who had been busy all day, have a comfortable meal. After returning, Zumengya was not idle either, but helped Eva to clean up the dishes, leaving Kinzu alone lying on the sofa in the living room, yawning lazily. "Boss, you can't lie down directly after eating. You need to exercise. It's good for your body." Dale sat aside, looking at the lazy Kinzu, and frowned slightly. She really couldn't figure out how her boss, who ate and slept, had such muscles. Could it be that sleeping late could also build muscles? Or was it a unique ability of Orientals? Whenever she got up early in the morning to exercise, she would think of these questions involuntarily when she looked at Kinzu's closed bedroom door. Well, to be precise, she was just envious and jealous. There was no way anyone would be jealous of this. He ate, drank, slept late every day, and his physical fitness was still great. She clearly remembered that when she'd first met Kinzu, although this guy was not completely powerless, he was not much different. But so much time had passed, and not only did she not see this guy exercising, but his physical fitness was also rising rapidly. Kinzu certainly didn't know what her female bodyguard was thinking now. After hearing her suggestion, he just laughed and perfunctorily said a few words. Perhaps, even if he knew, he would not tell Dale. Because there was no way to explain it. He couldn't tell others that he only needed to stay in the manor or a place with abundant spiritual energy every day, and his physical fitness would slowly improve, right? Therefore, Kinzu selectively ignored Dale's envious and jealous eyes, and still lay on the sofa and did his own thing. After Zumengyo and the others cleaned up the kitchen, Kinzu felt a little sleepy. So, he pulled the blushing beauty Zu and went to the second floor in the eyes of the two women with different thoughts. But when he came to the second floor, walked into his big bedroom, lay on the soft big bed, and felt the sweet smell close to him, Kinzu became energetic again. "What are you doing? Aren't you sleepy?" "I feel like going to take a shower and go to bed. It's so boring to just sleep in this long night, let's find something interesting to do." Kinzu smiled, and when he was about to continue, the mobile phone placed aside suddenly rang. Which bastard always interrupts my good things at the critical moment? Rubbing his hair a little frantically, Kinzu reluctantly let go of his hands, climbed to the head of the bed, and took his mobile phone. "Hey, it's from my sister." Looking at the video request that popped up on the phone, Kinzu's remaining scolding stopped abruptly, and his eyes became a little surprised. "What? From my sister?" Zumengyo also heard Kinzu's whisper, and hurriedly sat up and tidied her clothes. Kinzu smiled when he saw this, and also sat up and half leaned on the head of the bed. Regardless of the ejection of the beautiful Zu, he hugged her and let her snuggle in his arms. "What's wrong?" "Sister, is the beef over there sold out again?" As soon as the video was connected, Kinzu couldn't help asking. "Why, except that the beef is sold out, I can't call you." Listening to the words of the brother opposite, Kinwan rolled her eyes in annoyance. How could it be? Kinzu smiled awkwardly and scratched his head, and hurriedly changed the subject. "By the way, where's your brother-in-law? Did he go to the store so early in the morning?" However, as soon as he said this, Kinzu wanted to slap himself twice. Why was he talking about something that was not relevant? Sure enough, after hearing what Kinzu said, even though she saw Zumengyo right next to him, Kinwan complained. "How dare you say that? Why did you open a store? Your brother-in-law has to go out early and come back late every day, and he doesn't even have time to accompany Bongton and Lily." Kinzu could only smile at his sister's complaints. There was nothing he could do, because she was his own sister. Fortunately, Kinwan might have taken into consideration that Zumengyo was right next to her, so she didn't nag too much. After saying a few words to her brother, she got to the point of today. "Xiaozu, it's like this. The house you renovated for your parents at home is almost finished now. Your parents want to move in before the new year." "Move in so soon?" Kinzu said in surprise. "Didn't we agree at the beginning that when my younger sister is on vacation, she will come here to play for a few days, and then go back before the new year, and we can move together?" "Yes, it was agreed before, but now my parents have changed their minds," Kinwan said helplessly. To be honest, she was very curious about her brother's ranch, which was larger than the county town. So when she learned that the time to go to the United States would be postponed again, she was also reluctant. But there was nothing she could do about it. She couldn't stand her mother's nagging all day long. And Kinzu felt like punching cotton for the answer given by his elder sister, and he couldn't use any strength. "Yes, it was agreed before, but now my parents regret it. What else can you do?" Kinzu sighed a little depressed, and tightened his grip on the beauty beside him. Suddenly, he thought of something, so he quickly asked, "Sister, what about my little sister? What does she say?" "She should disagree with Mom's decision, right?" Hearing Kinzu talking about her little sister, Kinwan, who was still immersed in the fantasy of the ranch, couldn't help but burst out laughing at this time. Of course my little sister disagreed, but it was useless. Mom suppressed her directly. She didn't make a fuss. Kinzu was a little speechless. How could you be suppressed so easily? He remembered that this girl was very stubborn. How could you be dealt with by her mother so easily? Chapter 733. Returning home. On the other side of the video, Kinwan couldn't hide the smile on her face. Thinking of her little sister's noise a few days ago, she said to the video, "Don't mention it." The little girl has protested to Mom countless times, but she just ignored her. Having said that, Kinwan moved the video aside, pointed it at her mother who was sitting aside and laughed, and said with a helpless smile, "Shows you know our mom's temper." In the end, the little girl gave in on her own initiative. Before she finished speaking, Kinwan was hit on the head, and Kin's mother's embarrassed voice also sounded in the microphone. "Well, shucks you, it's not that Mom and Dad don't want to go to the United States. Isn't it almost the new year? We have to decorate the new house and celebrate the new year in the new house today." After listening to Kin's mother's nagging, Kinzu smiled helplessly. "Mom, didn't I tell you that when you come, we will move there together and celebrate the new year in the new house?" Kinzu said earnestly, and his mouth was almost dry, but Kin's mother kept shaking her head. "Shucks you, this is nothing, but you have a girlfriend now, remember to bring her back for the new year." As she said that, Kin's mother smiled at Zumengyo in the video and said, "Yo, come back with this brat this new year, and let's have a good family reunion." The beautiful Zhu, who was watching the show on the side, suddenly had a pretty face like a burning cloud, and instantly turned red. Not only that, even the white and tender ears like snow seemed to be stained with a touch of red clouds, which looked particularly crystal clear. Auntie, I know, I will definitely go back for the new year." After stuttering to finish this sentence, Zumengyo could feel that her heart seemed to relax suddenly, and her whole body was a little limp. She was at a loss and didn't even know when the video was hung up. When she woke up again, she found that she had been stripped into a little white sheep by some bad guy. Clean, what are you doing? Is the video hung up?" With a cry of surprise, the beautiful Zhu subconsciously wanted to hide in the quilt beside her. It's just a pity that although her wish is simple, it is difficult to realize. What are you afraid of? The video has been hung up a long time ago." Kinzu hugged the blushing Zumengyo in his arms and said with a sly smile, "Besides, my mother has invited you to her home as a guest, why are you still shy? It would have been better if she didn't say it." After Kinzu said this, the beautiful Zhu's face became even more rosy. The little hand kept patting Kinzu's chest. This shy woman who was a little overwhelmed kept acting coquettishly in her lover's arms. The night was as dark as ink, and the stars outside the window adulted. The gentle moonlight spread on the ground, creating ripples. In the room, Kinzu, who had just finished making love, hugged the Limzu dame and whispered private words between lovers. It is said that men are animals who think with their lower body, and Kinzu admits this. Before the video, Zhu, who was already angry, did not understand his mother's behavior. But when the passion subsided and reason returned to his head, Kinzu had a great sense of identity with his mother's behavior. It was indeed the case. Since Zumengyo already lived with him, and his mother also knew her existence, it was natural to bring her back to his hometown for the new year. So, now he is facing this problem, whether to move first or come here first. It is almost mid-January now, and there is only more than a month left before the new year. If they move first, they won't have time to come here after they move and clean up the room. If they let their mother and the others come first, they will definitely not go back after playing for a few days. In that case, when they go home to prepare for the new year, they will find that not only does the house need to be moved, but there is no preparation for the new year. Clean, what are you thinking about? Nestled in Kinzu's arms, Zumengyo raised her head and looked at the man she chose to entrust her life to. Kinzu came back to his senses, and his hands tightened subconsciously, making the beauty in his arms closer to him, and then smiled and said, "I'm thinking about going back for the new year, Mengyo. I haven't been to your home yet, so I'll go to your home during the new year." Hearing Kinzu's words, Zumengyo felt a burst of happiness. This was the first time Kinzu talked about going to her home. Although her family didn't care about her marriage, her parents would definitely be angry if she went to someone else's home for the new year without saying anything. Of course, this is not the most important point. The most important thing is that meeting the family means that the relationship between the two has taken a step forward. If the relationship between the two is in the passionate love period before, then meeting the family means that they have officially entered the stage of discussing marriage. A man or a woman who can accompany you on this journey means that he/she is really ready to go on with you. Yes, this is true. Except for those who get married for other purposes, every couple will have this idea at this stage. As for the future, people's ideas will always change, right? The messy thoughts in his mind flashed by. While Qin was embracing the beautiful Zhu and fantasizing, he was also secretly glad. Fortunately, foreigners don't think this aspect is important, and the few women he has don't seem to need to meet the parents. After thinking about it for a while, Qin gradually fell asleep. In the dream, he was hugged by women on both sides and lived a life of luxury all day long. Until a knock on the door came from far away, he woke up. Qin opened his confused eyes and looked around. He finally felt a little disappointed. The beauty beside him was still there, but she was no longer in his dream. Perhaps, every man is greedy. He ate from the bowl, looked at the pot, and was still thinking about the room. Bang, bang, bang! A crisp knock on the door once again echoed in the empty bedroom, and Qin's thoughts returned to reality. At the same time, Eva's voice with a hint of shyness also came in from the door. "Boss, are you up? Uncle Will is looking for you downstairs." "Will? Why is he here so early?" Although he was a little confused, Qin still responded. After sending away Eva, who disturbed his sleep, Qin yawned for a long time, and then he realized that it was already 10 o'clock in the morning. It's already 10 o'clock. We slept so long. Taking his eyes off the watch, Qin turned his head to look at Zhu Mengyo, who had already woken up beside him, and said with a smile. The beautiful Zhu responded very straightforwardly, with a charming little roll of her eyes, and muttered, "Go down and take a look. I want to sleep a little longer. Who told you to stay up so late?" Chapter 734 The Secret of the Fishing Boat. "Boss, good morning." Seeing Qin coming down from upstairs, Will, who had been waiting in the living room for a while, stood up and greeted him with a smile. "Morning, Will." Qin waved his hand casually and asked with a smile, "What's the matter with you coming here so early?" After Qin sat down on the sofa, Will sat back on the sofa again, hesitated for a moment, and then said, "Boss, I'm sorry to disturb your rest so early in the morning, but this matter is really important." "Oh?" Qin raised his head in surprise and looked directly at the guy who came to disturb him so early in the morning. "Why, Will, just tell me what you want to say." "Boss, it's like this, we found a radar in the fishing boat of the islanders." As Will continued to talk, Qin's face became more and more strange. "Radar? What the hell is this? This guy came to disturb his sweet dream so early in the morning just to tell him this?" After Will finished speaking, Qin took the milk from Eva and drank it while saying with some disapproval, "Will, isn't it normal for fishing boats to have radars? Maybe they install it to find schools of fish. There's nothing to be surprised about, right?" No, boss, this is different." Hearing what Qin said, Will waved his hands repeatedly. "This is a military version, I'm sure." Cough, cough, what did you say? Military? Qin's hands froze, and the milk that was originally raised to his mouth almost fell into his nostrils. After coughing several times, Qin regained his composure, but his eyes were still staring at the middle-aged white uncle opposite him with some surprise, staring at him non-stop. Will seemed to be a little uncomfortable being looked at by Qin. He twisted his body slightly to make himself sit more comfortably, and then said, "Yes, boss, the military version of the radar monitor can monitor any movement on the sea." Without waiting for Qin to speak, Will, who had taken a sip of water, continued, "Not only that, we also found depth charges and sonar in its bottom compartment." Qin said he was a little speechless. What kind of ship is this? Not only is it equipped with a military radar, but it also has depth charges. Let's go and take a look together." Qin couldn't sit still anymore. He stood up and called Will, and prepared to take a look at Pier 5. Seeing that the two were about to leave, Eva quickly took 2 sandwiches and handed them over. "Qin, take this with you, you can't skip breakfast." Qin took the sandwich, embraced the beauty, kissed her forehead gently, and said with a smile, "Dear, you are still the best." Being caught off guard by Kinzu's sudden hug, Eva secretly glanced at Will, and when she saw that he didn't pay attention to this side, she felt a little relaxed. Secretly kissing Kinzu back, Eva's face was a little ruddy and said, "Clean, you can call Dale, she may know more." Kinzu grinned when he heard it. "Good guy, this is the work of the Navy, this girl really thinks her sister is omnipotent." However, since she said so, Kinzu couldn't refuse her face, so he took Dale with him. This guy, how to say it, should be better than himself. While walking, Kindakyazu didn't forget to mutter in his heart. When the three of them arrived at the dock, Simon was already waiting outside. Seeing Kinzu, Simon's big black face turned red, and he said embarrassedly, "Boss, it was all my negligence. I didn't find these things at the Coast Guard at the beginning." Kinzu smiled disapprovingly, patted Simon's shoulder, and comforted him. "It's nothing. Everyone is negligent sometimes. Just pay attention next time." Simon nodded gratefully, and turned around with a few people to walk towards the fishing boat docked at the pier. Although Kinzu didn't mean to blame him, Simon felt very guilty in his heart. Julia has come to the ranch to work. Her daily job is to go around the greenhouse, which is very easy. Moreover, now the two of them have lived together again. After work every day, they can live a sweet world of two people. The boss is so good to him. Not only does he pay a high salary, but he also pays a high salary to his wife. But now, looking at him, except for a few trips to the sea to help the boss make a little money, he has been idle at the fishery. This time, I finally got the chance to help my boss, but I didn't even do such a small thing. While thinking about things, Simon took several people to the cockpit of the fishing boat. With his big hand, he gently pressed an inconspicuous place on the wall, and a huge display suddenly appeared next to the cockpit. "This is the radar display." Pointing at the display, Simon said a little depressed, "These guys actually installed the radar on the top of the cabin, so that people can't see it at all from the outside." Kinzu shrugged. He had expected this. After all, if it was really a military thing, how could it be exposed so easily? It was really pure luck that it was discovered this time. "Boss, what should we do now?" Will asked Kinzu with some worry. He was not concerned about the radar now, but worried about the depth charges in the cabin. Obviously, those were not fun things. If they were blown up by accident, it was really uncertain whether his group of people would still be alive. Moreover, if these things were found by the police, no one would be able to escape, even though there were so many people. Kinzu had obviously thought of what he could think of. Regardless of the presence of so many people, he picked up his phone and immediately contacted Kate, who had come over a few days ago. "Hi, Mr. Clean, I'm surprised to receive your call." Kate's surprised voice on the other end of the phone came through the microphone and clearly reached Kinzu's ears. With a big smile, Kinzu shook his head. It seemed that he really only contacted those guys when he had something to do. Cook was like this, Douglas was like this, and now Katie was still like this. This habit is very bad, it seems that he really needs to change it. Although the thoughts in his mind were extremely messy, Kinzu was still very calm and laughed with Katie on the other end of the phone. As expected, after hearing Kinzu's description of the situation here, Mr. Katie, who was sitting in the office, immediately roared angrily. "These damn little dwarfs from the island country actually dared to play tricks on me like this." After a pause, Katie's voice was a little hurried. "Mr. Clean, please wait a moment, I will leave soon and promise to arrive in 10 minutes. Please give monthly tickets, subscriptions, and rewards at the beginning of the month." Chapter 735 Angry Katie. It was said to be 10 minutes, but less than 5 minutes later, a Navy Type S-70 BC Hawk modified from a standard Black Hawk roared down beside the dock. The hatch opened, and under the leadership of Caddy, a team of more than 10 people lined up and walked towards this side. "Hi, Caddy." Standing on the deck of the fishing boat, Kinzu greeted several people from a distance. Officer Caddy, who looked a little unhappy, still forced a smile after seeing Kinzu. "Clean, thank you very much for your discovery. This is a negligence. Please forgive me." No, my friend." Kinzu waved his hand hurriedly. He was not here to hold the Coast Guard responsible today. It was just an accident, wasn't it? It's all because those dwarfs from the island countries are too cunning. I really can't figure out why they did this. While talking, Kinzu shook his head. He really felt a little puzzled about the actions of these dwarfs. You said that you were a fishing boat, so installing a radar is fine, and it can be understood that it is specially prepared for finding fish schools. But what about installing sonar? Is it also for finding fish schools? Well, even if you're also for finding fish schools, why do you carry so many depth charges? Is it for fun to blow up fish? Anyway, Kinzu was puzzled, so he decided to wait for the coast guards to see it. After bringing the group of people to the fishing boat, Kinzu ignored them and stood on the deck alone, quietly enjoying the winter sea breeze. Although the sky was a little chilly at this time, the sea breeze at this time was the purest. Perhaps it was because of a phone call last night. Now looking at the endless sea, Kinzu seemed to have returned to the past, back to his rural hometown thousands of miles away. There is also such an endless lake. I still remember that when I was young, my favorite thing to do was not to go out and play with my friends. What I liked most was to take a homemade fishing rod and go fishing in the lake that seemed endless to him at the time. Whenever he was lucky, he could catch more than a dozen river fish of different sizes from the lake. The big ones were naturally taken by Kinzu to feed his mother. As for the small ones, Kinzu had to release them, hoping that they would grow up quickly and come back to fish for them next year. But it was not until he grew up that he realized that those small fish would never grow up. His thoughts were flying, and now Kinzu suddenly had a desire. He wanted to go back now, back to his hometown in the countryside, back to his beloved family, and accompany them to spend their leisurely old age. A burst of hurried footsteps came, awakening Kinzu from his deep thoughts, and also brought him back to his senses from the distant illusion. The past can only be the past forever. I remember that a few years ago, I went back during the summer vacation, bought a fishing rod, and stood in the old place. However, the lake is no longer a big lake, but a small ditch. The boundless land in the past now seems so small. Kinzu sighed, took 2 deep breaths, calmed himself down, and then turned to look at the place where the footsteps came from. Kato strode out with 2 white men in uniforms. When they came close to Kinzu, they bowed sincerely. "Hey, Kato, what are you doing?" Kinzu was stunned, and quickly stretched out his hands to help the middle-aged white man with a serious face. "Clean, I'm very sorry that we have caused you a lot of trouble because of our negligence in work. Please understand." "Kato," I said, "this has nothing to do with you." Kinzu smiled and shrugged. "It's all the work of those little devils, isn't it?" Hearing this, Kato's serious face once again showed a smile. "Yes, Clean, you're right. It's all those damn guys. If it weren't for them, how could we be in such trouble?" After cursing the little devils according to Kinzu's words, Kato changed the subject and said apologetically, "Clean, I'm sorry, this ship can't stay with you for the time being." Kinzu nodded disapprovingly. He had expected this, so he smiled and said, "That's no problem, Kato, you just take it back first." As he said that, he seemed to think of something and asked hurriedly, "By the way, Kato, do you have enough crew members? Do you want me to send it over?" No, we have enough manpower." Kato nodded with some emotion and refused Kinzu's help. Among the people he brought this time, several of them can drive ships. After all, it would be a bit embarrassing if you can't drive a boat in the Coast Guard. But even so, he was still deeply moved by Kinzu's help and cooperation. Kinzu accepted all of Katie's touching words, since he had paid the price for them. After calling Will and Simon to get off the boat, Kinzu watched the fishing boat slowly go away, but he felt a little disappointed. Although the boat was indeed very cheap, it was his own after all. For this man with a strong possessiveness, he would not let go of anything that belonged to him so easily. After shaking his head and putting aside the messy thoughts in his mind, Kinzu smiled and waved to Katie on a helicopter to say goodbye. Katie looked at Kinzu's face, perhaps thinking that he was worried about the fishing boat, so he smiled and shouted, "Clean, don't worry, as long as the matter is over, I promise to send your boat back intact." In response, Kinzu just smiled, waved again, and watched the helicopter slowly take off. "Boss, let's just let it go," Simon muttered unconvinced behind him. "What else can we do?" Kinzu turned around and smiled at Simon behind him. "They didn't do it on purpose. Besides, we were able to do it last time thanks to their help." Simon knew all this, he just felt that he was tricked by those dwarfs, and muttered in frustration, "These guys are so abominable, don't wait for me, Simon, to meet them again." Compared to Simon's indignation, Will seemed much more rational. He followed Kinzu and watched the helicopter fly away, but asked in a strange tone, "Boss, what do you think the purpose of these guys is?" Kinzu shrugged, walked back with a smile, and his voice came faintly. "How should I know? Maybe it's just for fun." Chapter 736 Investigation Results. Kinzu didn't have to wait too long. Just as he was leisurely strolling around the ranch with Zumengyo, he received a call from Katie. "Mr. Clean, I'm sorry to bother you." I found some information here. I wonder if you have time to listen. Qin Zhu stopped, put his arm around the beautiful Zhu beside him, and said with a smile, Katie, just call me Qin. This seems too distant. Officer Katie on the other end of the phone heard this and agreed with a smile. Okay, Qin, then do you have time to listen to our investigation? Of course, I'm all ears. Qin Zhu shrugged helplessly. This guy, isn't he deliberately keeping people in suspense? Katie seemed to realize that he had not expressed himself clearly, and explained with a wry smile. Qin, it's like this. According to our investigation, they are not ordinary fishermen, and they are not targeting you intentionally. You were just affected. Oh? Qin Zhu was immediately interested and asked. You said they are not ordinary fishermen. What is that? It can't be said that all of them are not ordinary fishermen. It can only be said that the leader is not an ordinary fisherman. Katie explained in a serious tone. The leader is a retired soldier sent by the island country. They hired ordinary fishermen and drove fishing boats to search for something in this sea area. They? Searching for something? Qin Zhu's heart jumped and he couldn't help but exclaimed in surprise. Yes, they have more than one fishing boat. Katie sighed and said helplessly. These guys bought more than 10 fishing boats of varying ages, and hired so many fishermen, just to search for something. It's just too. Having said this, he didn't say anything else. After all, this kind of behavior of saying bad things about people behind their backs is very bad. Although Katie didn't say anything, Qin Zhu also understood what he meant. It was nothing more than saying that these guys were too wasteful. But Qin Zhu didn't think so. If it was really as he guessed, let alone 10 fishing boats, even if it was 100, he would not hesitate. After all, that was worth hundreds of millions, or even billions of dollars. However, he couldn't figure it out. Since they were looking for these missing ships, why did they bring depth charges? Could it be that they wanted to destroy those things? Qin Zhu's guess was not wrong. When these island dwarfs set out, they had received orders. If they found that these things were discovered by others or were in a position that could not be salvaged, they would destroy them directly. The idea of the island dwarfs was very simple. Since they were destined not to get it, they couldn't let others get it. After hanging up the phone, Qin Zhu's spirit was still in a trance. It seemed that those guys were really anxious. Now they even used the human wave tactics. What's wrong? Is there anything? Seeing Qin Zhu was a little dazed after answering the phone, Zhu Mengyu asked with concern. Coming back to his senses, Qin Zhu smiled. Nothing, it's just that Katie told me about the handling of the fishing boat. Oh. Zhu Mengyu nodded, and didn't ask any more questions. She didn't want to give people the feeling that she was meddling too much. Of course, this was limited to official business. If it was a private matter, she would definitely get to the bottom of it. Let's go, we should go back. Reaching out and holding Zhu Mengyu's frozen little hand, Qin Zhu helped her to cover it with some heartache. Zhu Mengyu didn't refuse, but instead put her little hand into Qin Zhu's coat pocket and interlocked her fingers with him. Qin Zhu smiled, held the soft little hand tightly, as if holding the most precious thing in the world, and walked slowly towards the villa. Ouch! Betty, who was ignored by the two gorgeously, followed behind and roared pitifully. It felt very aggrieved now. Not to mention being pulled up early in the morning to run. After running and having a simple breakfast, it actually had to go out for exercise. My poor sleep. A certain white-haired brown bear rubbed his big eyes and looked helpless, roaring in his heart. Of course, no matter how much he roared, Qin Zhu and the others would still ignore him. After returning to the villa, Qin Zhu did not stop, but directly pulled Zhu Mengyu to his study. Why did you pull me here? After entering the study, Zhu Mengyu looked up and down, and looked at Qin Zhu with some doubts. Qin Zhu smiled without saying a word, walked to the 2 rows of bookshelves, opened a small box like a treasure, pointed at the things inside, and showed off with a proud face. Mengyu, come and see, what are these? What? Zhu Mengyu responded curiously and walked straight over. When her eyes, which seemed to have no focus, focused on the box that had been opened, she was stunned. These are antiques. Are they real? Zhu Mengyu turned her head to look at Qin Zhu with some uncertainty, and a blush rose on her pretty face, her little mouth slightly opened, and the whole person looked very cute. Of course, these are all real. Qin Zhu smiled and took out the vase he showed her, carefully placed it on the desk, and pointed to an appraisal certificate next to it. Here, look, this is the appraisal certificate. I found a very skilled appraisal master, and he issued it to me. Appraisal certificate? Hearing Qin Zhu talking about the appraisal certificate, Zhu Mengyo shook her head, reached out to pick up the booklet, and explained with a smile. These appraisal certificates in China, anyone can issue them, it mainly depends on the person. Before she finished speaking, her eyes froze again. This is the appraisal certificate issued by Mr. Chen? Mr. Chen? Hearing Zhu Mengyo's address, Qin Zhu's eyelids jumped involuntarily. My goodness, is that old man still a big shot? No, he's not a big shot, he's just a respected senior. After noticing Qin Zhu's thoughts, Zhu Mengyo regained her composure, chuckled and explained, Mr. Chen is very famous in the domestic and foreign collectors' circles. Even my grandfather has bought things from him. Oh, that's it. Qin Zhu nodded, not quite understanding, and quickly changed the subject. If he continued to talk, he would not be able to bear the stimulation. By the way, then the appraisal certificate he issued should be fine, right? Of course, the appraisal certificate issued by Mr. Chen can be regarded as authoritative, and people in the collector's circle generally recognize it. Listening to Zhu Mengyo's decisive words, Qin Zhu showed a satisfied smile on his face. This is really something worth celebrating. Because, when Chen Fud came over last time, he had basically helped to appraise these things he took out. Moreover, they all have appraisal certificates. I didn't think so at the time, but now I think about it, this old man is really generous. Chapter 737 Yunya Jing's visit. After visiting some antiques in the study, Qin Zhu took Zhu Mengyo to the basement to visit another collection room. In fact, if it weren't for Kata's phone call today to remind him, Qin Zhu would have almost forgotten that he had 2 collection rooms. There was no way, he was not short of money, and his life was very comfortable. He spent the whole day with his girlfriend, occasionally found an opportunity to secretly have sex with a big foreign horse, and at worst teased a few little guys. How could he have time to think about other things? But since he remembered it, he simply took Zhu Demarin to visit together and enjoy the admiring eyes of the beauty, which was also necessary. Clean, where did you get these? Did others leave them for you? Zhu Mengyo looked at it, and she was amazed, and her eyes looking at Qin Zhu also became a little weird. If she hadn't been with this guy all day, she would have thought this was someone's little white face. Qin Zhu didn't know that in the eyes of Zhu Demarin, he was almost on par with the little white face. He told her the story with a proud look on his face. Of course, it was all processed artistically. Anyway, no one could prove it, so he could say whatever he wanted. You mean, they were all fished out of the sea? Zhu Mengyo opened her mouth slightly in surprise, with a look of suspicion on her face. Why would I lie to you? Seeing that she still didn't believe him, Qin Zhu explained the story of the dwarf from the island country. Only then did Zhu Mengyo nod doubtfully. I said, how could the years of the things you fished out from the sea but at one time be so different? Qin Zhu nodded with a wry smile, and he didn't feel embarrassed at all for robbing someone else's things. Not only him, but even the always gentle Zhu Mengyo didn't say anything about returning the things to the owner, or that it was wrong to take advantage of someone's misfortune. This made Qin Zhu's impression of the beautiful Zhu deepen a little bit. After the tour, the two ended upstairs and sat on the sofa. Zhu Mengyo was holding a painting in her hand, gesturing to see where to put it. As for Qin Zhu hiding so many good things in the study and the basement, Miss Zhu felt that it was a waste. You know, antiques are meant to be displayed for people to appreciate and circulate. If they're hidden in the basement, how can their value be reflected? Therefore, after taking a fancy to a landscape painting, Miss Zhu decided to display all these things in the villa. Qin Zhu didn't care about this, because he didn't have to worry about it anyway. Just as Miss Zhu was still struggling over where to hang the calligraphy and painting, Dale walked in from outside. Boss, Miss Yoon is outside the ranch, do you want to see her? Miss Yoon? Which Miss Yoon? Qin Zhu didn't react for a while, and looked at Dale with a blank look. Miss Yoon Jin, you know her in Revere. You saved her once some time ago. Oh, Qin Zhu nodded as if he had suddenly realized something, and waved his hand hurriedly, saying, let them in quickly, before they say we are being arrogant. Yedel agreed, picked up the intercom and said a few words, then walked out. Qin Zhu breathed a sigh of relief when he saw this, and couldn't help but laugh. These guys actually set up a sentry box at the gate to the ranch. At the gate to the ranch, a silver-gray BMW S Series coupe was parked at the moment. The two women sitting in the car were Yoon Yeo-ji in a light-colored coat and Xiaoyan in a mink vest. Looking at the wooden house next to the gate and the tightly closed ranch gate, if it was Xiaoyan before, she would definitely be a little dissatisfied. Just as Qin Zhu said, she would definitely think that she had given you a lot of face by visiting you, so why are you being arrogant? But after experiencing the last incident, Xiaoyan seemed to have grown up overnight. Yes, that's right, Yun Jing felt that way. Xiaoyan was like a child who hadn't grown up in front of her, and she was always worried about him. But now, she is not only honest and ladylike, but also much more sensible. Yangzi, has the guy come to see you again these days? Looking at Xiaoyan in the co-pilot, Yun Jing asked with a smile. No, he was kicked out by my mother last time. How dare he come again? Thinking of the courteous pursuer, Xiaoyan couldn't help but smile. A hint of ridicule. With her performance that day, he still wants to pursue her. Dream on. Yun Jing wanted to say something, but the ranch gate was already opened at this time, so she had to hold back her words and restart the car. With the powerful roar of the car engine, the silver-grey BMW coupe appeared at the end of the ranch road like a gust of wind. Clean, what are they doing here? Zhu Mengyo wrinkled her nose in dissatisfaction. She had seen Yun Jing's beauty before, and she was not much worse than her. Even in terms of figure, Yun Jing was better than her. Except that she was younger than her, Zhu Mengyo could not find any other place to surpass her. Therefore, Zhu Mengyo was still a little wary of such a woman coming to see Qin Zhu. Qin Zhu didn't think so much, and he never thought that a woman who had only met a few times would like him. He was not that narcissistic. So for Zhu Mengyo's little worry, Qin Zhu directly gave her a French kiss, which wiped out her sourness. The silver-grey BMW coupe stopped not far in front of Qin Zhu and his friends, and the car door opened. Yun Jing and the short-haired girl Xiaoyan, who had not been seen for a few days, walked down together. Ha ha, Sister Yun, you're a rare guest. Why did you think of coming to my place today? Although he was a little surprised about their purpose in coming together, Qin Zhu still responded enthusiastically. Seeing Qin Zhu actually waiting at the door, after approaching and exchanging a few pleasantries, Qin Zhu pulled Zhu Mengyo out from behind and introduced her. Sister Yun, this is my wife Zhu Mengyo. Then, he smiled and introduced her to Zhu Mengyo. The one opposite is Sister Yun, you should know her, and the one next to her is Xiaoyan. Zhu Mengyo was very satisfied with Qin Zhu's introduction and glanced at him charmingly, meaning that if you do well, there will be a reward in the evening. Qin Zhu also gave a teasing look in return, meaning that we can try the posture we discussed last time in the evening. Even though Zhu Mengyo had already gotten used to Qin Zhu's naked teasing, her face still blushed slightly. After glaring at this guy fiercely, Zhu Mengyo smiled and said, Sister Yun, Xiaoyan, let's go, let's talk inside. Qin Zhu slapped his forehead when he heard this, and smiled a little ashamedly. Really, how can you let guests talk outside? Let's go inside. Si est escuchando esta novela en un canal distinto a mundo fanfic novelas, significat lo descarga and y subir en esfuerzos invitamos cordialmente a visitar nuestro canal. Mundo fanfic novelas all encontrar la versión original de esta historia y podrás explorar muchas otras novelas de diversos narradores. Te esperamos para sumergirte en un mundo de novelas increíbles. Chapter 738 Invitation. After entering the villa and everyone was seated, Yun Jing looked at Qin Zhu and said gratefully, Qin, we came here mainly to thank you for saving our lives that day. As she said that, she stood up and bowed deeply. Xiaoyan, who was beside her, followed suit and stood up and bowed 90 degrees to Qin Zhu. The two women made Qin Zhu feel a little embarrassed. He wanted to reach out to help, but the beautiful Zhu was still watching. If she thought that he was taking advantage of the opportunity, it would not be good. Fortunately, Zhu Mengyo stepped forward in time and helped the two girls up. With a gentle smile on her face, she said, Sister Yun, don't be so polite. We are all Chinese and it is our duty to help each other. Yes, yes. Qin Zhu nodded quickly and said with a smile, Sister Yun is too polite. When we are away from home, we need to help each other. Upon hearing this, Yun Jing stood up, but the gratitude on her face did not diminish at all. Thank you is our duty. We just got out of the hospital today, otherwise we would have come here a long time ago. After a pause, without waiting for Qin Zhu and the others to speak, Yun Jing continued, Mr. Qin, Miss Yu, it's like this. We happened to be discharged from the hospital together today. Several families have discussed it and are planning to invite you to have dinner together. Do you have time? This. Qin Zhu looked at the beautiful Zhu beside him. After seeing her nod, he smiled and said, no problem. When? We will be there on time. Seeing that the two had agreed, Jing finally smiled. Tonight, you can call all the sisters who came that day, and I will come to pick you up. Yu waved his hand gently. No need, Sister Yoon, just tell us the address, and we can go there by ourselves. Jing didn't say anything else, but reported the address again. After Yu wrote it down, she said again, by the way, Nan has to do the last examination in the morning, so she didn't have time to come. After meeting in the evening, she will thank you in person. Yu smiled bitterly. Sister Yoon, you really don't have to be so polite. I feel a little embarrassed. It's my duty to save you. Jing smiled, said nothing more, and stood up to say goodbye. The main purpose of her coming today was to invite Yu and others. Since it has been successful, she is going to go back and prepare well. As for Xiaoyan, who followed, she kept her head down after entering the villa and didn't say a word from beginning to end. It's not that she didn't want to say anything, but facing Yu's eyes, she felt that she couldn't say anything. After all, she had slandered this man a lot in the past. Fortunately, Yu was not so petty and would not embarrass a girl for such a small matter. The guests were leaving, and Yu and his partner certainly would not just sit there. After trying to persuade them to stay, he walked out of the villa with them. Watching the silver grey coupe slowly going away, Zumengyo turned her head to look at Yu and half-jokingly teased. I just realized that you are quite popular with women, right? Looking at Zumengyo's half-smiley expression, Yu rubbed her black hair helplessly. What's good or bad? You saved them, so they came to treat us to a meal. Zumengyo took the mischievous hand away from her head with dissatisfaction, snorted, but didn't say anything else. Instead, she looked at the time and said, it's almost the new year. When are you going back? Yu wiped the cold sweat from his forehead, thought for a while, and then smiled and said, at the end of the month. Go back at the end of the month. It will be more than 10 days before the new year. Will it be in time? Yu smiled and walked into the house, saying, my parents are already arranging the move. When we go back, we just need to eat and drink, and don't have to worry about so much. Nodding, seeing that Yu had an idea in mind, Zumengyo didn't ask any more questions, and followed with a smile. Time passed quickly, and a day passed in that busyness. At around 4 o'clock in the evening, Yu took the reluctant Zhu Marin and ran upstairs to take a mandarin duck bath and changed clothes, and then he was willing to leave the villa. However, just when everything was ready, Betty's pitiful howl reminded Yu that he hadn't prepared dinner for them yet. Eva would also go to the banquet with them today, but no one would prepare food for the little ones. After exchanging a glance with Zumengyo, Yu shrugged helplessly. Okay, I'll prepare food for them, and you go wash some fruits. Zumengyo smiled and nodded, took the fruits from the coffee table, and went to the kitchen with Yu. So, Eva and Zumengyo were busy preparing the fruits, and Yu also took out a large piece of beef and put it directly into the pot to start cooking. As if knowing that there would be delicious food soon, Daha and Xiaohe held their plates in their mouths and ran over eagerly. Betty was not to be outdone. Relying on her larger size, she directly occupied a large area of the kitchen door. No matter how anxious Daha and Xiao were behind her, she would never give in. Yu saw this, went straight forward, grabbed its round little ears, and pulled it aside. Squat here, right, that's it. Seeing this, the remaining little guys came to Betty and squatted down one by one with their plates in their mouths without waiting for Yu to do anything. Seeing this, Yu smiled and nodded. Mengyo, look at our little babies, how obedient they are. Zumengyo came over with the washed fruits and asked with a smile. Except Betty, right? Yu was about to say yes, but he felt as if there was an extra little hand on his waist. He turned his head to look at the beautiful woman beside him with a smile, and had to shake his head fiercely. No, Betty is also very obedient, really. Zumengyo then let go of her little hand with satisfaction, took the fruit and ran to cut it into small pieces. Turning his head to see that no one was paying attention, Yu took advantage of the moment he turned around and touched the smiling Eva with his dirty hands. Eva almost cried out in surprise at the sudden attack, but luckily she reacted quickly, glared at Yu fiercely, then quickly knocked away the dirty hand and ran in to help. Yu chuckled, put his hand under his nose and sniffed gently, and seemed to be able to feel a fragrance invading the tip of his nose. However, time was not too abundant now, and seeing that several people were busy, he followed them in. He took out the almost cooked beef, divided it into several portions, and then sent it to the little ones. When everything was almost ready, Yu looked at the time. Fortunately, it was only 5:30. let's go quickly. The time agreed with Sister Yoon is 6 o'clock, and it's just right to go now. Thanks to Lenge for the reward of 1,000 starting coins. Chapter 739. Dinner. At about 6 o'clock in the evening, a steel behemoth drove to the gate of a high-end villa community in Revere. After verifying the identity, the security guard opened the gate, and the car drove straight to the door of a 3-story European-style villa and stopped. Kinzu and Zumengyo, together with Eva and Dale, got out of the car. At the door of this small villa that seemed to occupy a large area, there were already many men and women standing, obviously waiting for them. This must be Mr. Clean. My humble name is Yoon King. Thank you very much for saving my daughter's life. Before Kinzu could take a closer look at the situation in front of him, the man in his 40s who was in the lead took the lead and extending his hands and approaching him. Yoon King? After a slight pause, Kinzu reacted. This should be Yoon Yejin's father, right? Thinking of this, the landlord Kin also showed a bright smile on his face and held his hands with Yoon King. Uncle Yoon, you are too polite. You can call me Xiao Kin or Kinzu. Besides, it was just a coincidence. Coincidence? If it wasn't for Xiao Kin, I don't know what would have happened. Yoon King said with some fear. Sister Yoon is lucky and lucky. Even if I wasn't there, the police would have quickly felt the need to save people. The smile on Kinzu's face was very sincere, and he didn't mean to make people grateful just because he saved others. Come to think of it, if he hadn't participated in the rescue operation, would he have received so many benefits? The two of them were greeting each other at the door, which made the people waiting behind them a little at a loss. It was not right to greet them, and it was obviously not appropriate to wait there. Yoon Yejin couldn't stand it anymore, and said coquettishly beside him, "Dad, are you going to let the guests in?" It didn't matter what she said, Kinzu's eyes almost popped out. He had met Yoon Yejin many times, but when had he ever seen this quiet and elegant woman act so coquettishly? After hearing what his daughter said, Yoon King also reacted and said with a smile, Yes, Xiao Kin, let's go in first." As they walked, Yoon King introduced the people around him to Kinzu. After entering the villa, Kinzu roughly figured out the identities of the people present. It turned out that Shayan, who had been looking down at his toes, and Yoon Nanan, who had been secretly looking at him, were both Yoon Yejin's little cousins. Their families were all in China, and only 2 girls were studying in the United States, so they stayed at Yoon Yejin's house. As for the men who traveled together that day, they were all classmates of Shaoyan and the other 2. The last trip was proposed by Shaoyan's classmates, and Shaoyan was very curious, so she agreed. When it came to Yoon Yejin, she was definitely worried about her 2 cousins going out with others, so she followed them. Originally, Yoon King was against a little girl going hunting, but Shaoyan's family also knew Yoon King, so he didn't say anything. But who knows, what you worry about will come true, and something really happened this time. If you hadn't gone in time, Xiao Kin, I really don't know how it would end. This America is really something. Why do they have so many wolves in the mountains? Speaking of this, Yoon King still has a little fear now, not to mention Yoon Yejin's mother. Kinzu took a look at Yoon Yejin's mother who was sitting next to him. She was well maintained and looked to be in her 40s. Standing with Yoon Yejin, they didn't look like mother and daughter at all. Seeing that her eyes were a little red, Kinzu quickly changed the subject and asked, "By the way, Sister Yoon, are the men with you okay?" "No." Yoon Yejin hadn't answered yet, but Shaoyan suddenly interrupted and sneered. "Brother Clean, you don't know that after we left, a wild wolf went up and several people were bitten by the wild wolf. They really deserved it." "Bitten?" Kinzu was stunned. "Nothing will happen, right?" Sensing Kinzu's worry, Shaoyan hurriedly explained. "Brother Clean, don't worry, it's not a big deal. The police finally rushed over and they were just bitten on the thigh." Hearing her say this, Kinzu was relieved and said with a smile, "That's good. If something really happened, I would feel bad. Brother Clean, it's not your fault that the helicopter is overloaded." Yoon Nanan also persuaded at the side of this time. However, she was smarter than Shaoyan after all. After talking to Kinzu, she turned to chat with Zumengyu and Diva and other girls beside her. Several women gathered together. Except for Dale who didn't like chatting, the others quickly chatted together. From makeup to shopping, from food to fashion magazines, Kinzu was confused and didn't know what they were talking about. Fortunately, dinner started soon. The dinner was very rich. Perhaps because there were several foreigners, there were not only many traditional Chinese dishes, but also a lot of Western dishes. Moreover, even the Chinese food was not the kind that was served on a plate and everyone picked it up with chopsticks. Instead, each person prepared a small portion and ate their own. Qinzu said that this way of eating was very novel. It was the first time he had seen it. He looked at Zhu Mingguo, and she shrugged, saying that it was the first time she had seen it. Come on, Xiaoqin, don't be polite. I don't know if it suits your taste. After Yuan King sat down, he greeted Qinzu very enthusiastically. However, it can be seen that he is not very used to this situation. Obviously, he also spent a lot of effort to entertain Qinzu and his group. Whether it was him or Qinzu, in the past, when they went out to attend banquets, they were all in the form of pure Western-style buffets. And when Qinzu cooked food at home, everyone used chopsticks to pick up dishes from a bowl. But he never paid attention to separate the dishes for each person. After all, he felt that it was too troublesome. Since it was a dinner party, wine was definitely indispensable. After everyone was seated, Yuan King took out 2 bottles of Bordeaux red wine and a bottle of aged Maotai from behind, and asked with a smile, "Xiaoqin, take a look, which one should we drink tonight?" Looking at the bottle of Maotai aged with a slightly old packaging, Qinzu said in surprise, "Uncle Yun, I didn't expect you to have such a good thing." Yuan King opened the wine, handed the red wine to Yun Yijing, and asked her to greet a few girls, while he took the Maotai and filled a glass for Qinzu. Raising the glass and clinking it with Qinzu, Yuan King smiled and said, "There is no way. Your Uncle Yun can't get used to the foreign wine. It doesn't have any strength at all, so I set up a wine cellar here, and put all the white wine brought from China in it." Chapter 740 Simon's Dream. It was relatively simple to know whether Will and his friends could fly a plane. All it took was a phone call. However, in order to work together, Qinzu asked Will to come to the villa to discuss. After spending some time upstairs, Qinzu took the beautiful Zhu, whose face was still a little flushed, downstairs leisurely. Qinzu didn't have to wait for long. While he was accompanying the beautiful Zhu by the fireplace, combing Betty's snow-white hair, Will pushed the door and walked in. "Boss, you want me?" Seeing the two of them, Will greeted them nervously. He thought all the way but couldn't figure out why the boss wanted to come over so early in the morning. The tone on the phone didn't sound very good. How could he know that when Qinzu called him, he was still teasing a beautiful woman, so his tone was naturally a little anxious. However, all this did not affect Qinzu's current mood. Looking at the beautiful lady Zhu with a smile on her face, and listening to Betty's snoring because of comfort, he felt very comfortable. So, when he heard Will's voice behind him, he turned around and waved his hand, smiling and said, "Sit down for a while, I have something to talk to you about." Seeing Qinzu's smiling face, Will couldn't help but feel relieved. It seems that at least it's not a bad thing. After Will sat down on the sofa, Qinzu also said hello to Betty, and returned to the living room with the beautiful lady Zhu, who was reluctant to leave. It doesn't matter if he leaves like this, but Betty, who is enjoying it, won't do it. She shook her little head and made a humming sound in her mouth, hoping to regain the favor of her master. But this is destined to be impossible. There is no way. Who asked Qinzu to talk about business now? It must be not good to bring a bear when talking about business. Seeing Betty being humiliated, the brothers Gahe and Zhao, who were growing stronger day by day, immediately started to mock Betty, and they all whined and yelled at Betty. Betty, who had wanted to fight back, quickly tucked her tail between her legs when she saw that she was about to be beaten up, hid her big head under her arms, and lay on the carpet to avoid being bothered. Qinzu didn't pay much attention to what happened here. After Will sat down, he said directly, "Will, regarding the problem you raised a few days ago, what do you think about us buying 2 helicopters? Can it solve the problem?" Will, who was a little confused by what Qinzu said, became lively as soon as he heard that he was going to buy them a helicopter, and said hurriedly, "Boss, of course, if we have a helicopter, we can save more than half of our time." Qinzu nodded happily when he saw this. "So, you all know how to fly a helicopter?" "No." Will answered very straightforwardly. Qinzu couldn't help but have a few black lines on his forehead, and looked at him with some depression. "You guy, what are you talking about if you can't fly a plane?" As if he understood Qinzu's mood, Will also showed an awkward smile on his face. However, he immediately thought of something and hurriedly said, "Boss, I can't do it, but Simon can, and Hubbard and others seem to be able to do it." "Simon can?" Qinzu looked at Will sitting on the sofa opposite in surprise. "Are you sure you are not kidding? You, the master, can't do it, and you tell me that your apprentice can?" Fortunately, Will can always find Qinzu's doubts in time, and explained with a smile, Boss, I don't always take Simon with me. He learned it when he went to work somewhere else. Then, he sighed helplessly, I could have learned it, but I felt that I was old at the time, and it would be a waste of energy to learn it, so I didn't continue to learn. What a pity. Kinzu shook his head with some disappointment. If Will could fly a plane again, it would be perfect. However, there is nothing perfect in the world, right? Since someone can fly a plane, everything will be easy. After just a little thought, Kinzu smiled and said, Will, let Simon prepare up tomorrow. Come with me to pick 2 helicopters tomorrow. When Will heard about this good thing, he regretted it even more. However, there is no regret medicine in the world. Since it has come to this, he had to agree and turned around and walked out of the villa. After Simon got the news, he was more excited than Kinzu imagined. Before the next day, he came to the door with a large brochure in the afternoon. Hi, boss, good afternoon, I'm sorry to bother you. After seeing Kinzu, Simon greeted him a little embarrassedly. There was no way, who told him to come at the wrong time. Taking advantage of the afternoon, the landlord Kin was leisurely basking in the sun under the porch. When the north wind blew, he felt a little itchy in his heart. Just when he wanted to flirt with the beauty in his arms, his sudden appearance ruined the atmosphere. Seeing the beautiful Zhu shyly running into the villa, Kinzu glared at the guy unhappily, and pointed to the lounge chair on the other side of the porch. Sit down and talk. What's the matter that makes you look for me so urgently? Well, I'm sorry, boss, I came at a wrong time. Simon didn't hesitate and sat down. But when talking about his recklessness, this guy was still a little embarrassed. It's a pity. With his face as black as the bottom of a pot, it's really hard to tell what he was embarrassed about. Kinzu looked at it for a while and didn't see it, so he didn't bother about it anymore and waved his hand casually. Forget it, you should tell me, what do you want to talk to me about? Hearing Kinzu's question, Simon came back to his senses and hurriedly took out the brochure from his side. Boss, Will told me that you were going to buy an airplane. Have you made your choice? What kind should we buy? Simon, what do you have? Kinzu did not answer Simon's question directly, but stared at the thick brochure, with a curious expression on his face. Ha, boss. Simon raised the brochure in his hand with a little pride. This is a sample of airplanes that appeared at the last airplane exhibition. There are airplanes from all major manufacturers. If you need it, you can learn about it first. Oh? How do you have this? Kinzu took it curiously and asked casually while flipping through the photos of various airplanes on it. To his surprise, Simon fell into a brief silence after hearing his words. Hi, Simon. It was not until Kinzu asked again that Simon seemed to wake up from a dream, and explained embarrassedly, Boss, my dream since I was a child is to be a real pilot. Thank you to call me uncle for the reward of 500 starting coins, thank you to Zhuyin for the reward of 600 starting coins, thank you to Hipping for the reward of 1100 starting coins, and congratulations to Hipping for becoming the helmsman of this book. I owe you more updates in advance. Thank you. Chapter 741 Naughty Betty. The wind blew gently, causing the oak trees on the roadside to sway constantly. Above the blue sky, the white clouds seemed to be particularly far away from the ground, making it difficult to see their specific shapes. In the warm bedroom, there was a spring atmosphere. On the soft big bed, the 2 people, exhausted after a night of fierce fighting, were still immersed in the sweet dream. Creaky. The bedroom door suddenly pushed open quietly. However, after waiting for a long time, no one came into the room. Except for the wisps of breeze, everything was so calm that it was a little weird. Oh, no. A big furry head poked its head in. On the big white head, 2 black, rolling little eyes looked particularly pleasing. However, now he looked a little cautious, with 2 small ears close to his head, and even when he walked, he was light-footed. The bedroom was a big bed, and the little guy slowly moved, step by step, to the front of the big bed in the bedroom. Betty, who had just come back from exercising outside, stretched out her little paws and clung to the bed, her 2 black little eyes darting around, trying to see what the masters were doing. This was the 3rd time. It was clearly an exercise plan they had made, but they didn't participate for the 3rd time, leaving only the brothers who were still struggling to persist. So, under the encouragement of Daha and Dawu, and the indulgence of Eva and Dale like watching a play, Betty, who had a big breakfast, bravely came to investigate the enemy situation. However, it was a pity that the little guy was still too small. Even if he stood up by clinging to the bed, he could only expose his head. It was impossible to climb up. After looking around, Betty gave up the idea of climbing up and turned around the big bed. When Betty was in the bedroom, clinging to the big bed and circling around, 4 little heads squeezed in from the gap in the door. The 4 little guys looked at Betty, who was still waving at them in the bedroom, with sympathy on their faces, and kept saying amen in their hearts. Sure enough, not long after, a scream was heard in the room, followed by a roar. "Fuck, Betty, I swear, if you don't get out, I will throw you out of the window." Kinzu sat on the bed, looking at Betty beside the bed with a black line, wishing to kick this idiot out directly. "What's wrong?" After being called by Kinzu, Zumengyo beside him also woke up, rubbed her eyes in a daze, sat up, yawned a little, and asked weakly, "Clean, who messed with you so early in the morning?" "It's still this idiot." Seeing that Betty didn't even have the intention to leave, Kinzu grabbed its little ears without hesitation and pulled it a few times with a little force. He was really startled just now. He was sleeping soundly. He felt something moving around him. When he opened his eyes, he met Betty's dark eyes. As you can imagine, Kinzu, who was still a little confused, lost his sleep in an instant. After Zumengyo understood what happened, she laughed so hard that she lifted the quilt, put on her underwear and got out of bed. She was not afraid of exposing herself at all. "Be good, baby, don't be afraid. Let's go and ignore him." Looking at Zumengyo, whose skin was white and delicate, holding Betty by her side to comfort her, Kinzu was very angry. However, the anger at this time was not anger. It was a normal reaction of a man in the morning. After lifting the quilt, Kinzu also got out of bed, took the somewhat dazed Betty from Zumengyo's arms, and dragged her directly to the door. Bang! With the sound of the door closing, Zumengyo's slightly teasing voice also came over. "Oh, you are really angry now? You are not ashamed to be angry with a little guy?" Kinzu turned his head, rubbing his hands constantly, and said with a sly smile, "I'm not angry, but my brother is angry, so you should accept your fate." Zumengyo did not react for a moment, and asked foolishly, "Your brother? Who is he?" As soon as the words came out, the beautiful Zhu reacted, her face suddenly turned red, and she gave Kinzu a charming little roll of the eyes. Even so, she still could not escape, and was thrown onto the bed by Kinzu, and the horn of attack was blown again. When the two washed up and walked downstairs refreshed, it was almost noon. Seeing Kinzu coming down, Betty, who did not feel that she was wrong at all, came up again. This is good. Just when Kinzu felt that he was not satisfied just now, there is something delivered directly to his door. "Come on, little guy, let's have a good talk." Kinzu pinched Betty's round face with a sly smile and began to settle accounts with it one by one. It doesn't matter if it's not settled, the more Betty's round face is settled, the more bitter it is. In the end, the little guy almost cried directly. "Don't bully people like this. It's okay not to give food, but the training time will be extended in the future." Why? This is not what Betty thinks in her mind, but the 4 little guys who were watching the fun think in their minds. Without him, Kinzu thinks that good brothers, of course, share happiness and difficulties together. Didn't our ancestors say it, revolutionary friendship? What does it mean? It means that friendship in suffering is the real friendship. So, the 4 little guys, very bitterly accompanied Betty to suffer together. As for Kinzu's nonsense, Zumengyo, who followed down, didn't want to stop it at all. "Just kidding, I just tried to stop it, but ended up getting myself involved." Moreover, looking at his unsatisfied look, if he tried to stop him again, it is possible that he would pull him up and force him. In the spirit of a friend dies rather than a poor person dies, the beautiful lady Zuet while watching TV leisurely. "By the way, Clean, didn't you say you made an appointment with Simon to go and watch airplanes today?" Zumengyo suddenly remembered the conversation between the two yesterday and turned around to remind him. Kinzu didn't care too much about this. He pinched Betty's round little face and smiled and replied, "The appointment is in the afternoon. After dinner, we will take a helicopter directly. It will be very fast." "Oh, agreed," and Zumengyo asked curiously, "Have you chosen the airplane?" "Almost chosen, this time we will just go to see the real thing. If the difference is not big, we will decide directly." Seeing that Betty was looking at him pitifully, Kinzu had had enough fun, so he let go of this guy. Zumengyo smiled and watched Betty run to her side, rubbing its little head, but said, "By the way, I haven't asked you yet, which company are you going to go to watch the airplane this time?" Chapter 742 Bell Helicopter Company. Buzz. Accompanied by a roar, the Angus cows that were chewing grass leisurely in the pasture raised their heads curiously. It must be said that the noise of the helicopter is still very loud. Even if they are far away, these guys can still hear the sound every time it takes off. Simon, have you made an appointment with Belle? Sitting in the modified helicopter cockpit, Kinzu leisurely looked at the blue sky outside the window and said with a smile, "Don't wait until we arrive, and we can't even find a place to park. How is this possible?" Hearing Kinzu's words, Simon shook his big head excitedly. "Boss, even if there is no appointment, they will not refuse you to stop, not to mention that I have already made an appointment with them." Kinzu nodded. He just said it casually, wanting to find a topic to talk about. He was still very confident in Simon's efficiency. "By the way, Simon, why do you think Bell Helicopter is better than Gulfstream Aerospace? I remember that Gulfstream seems to be more famous in the field of aircraft, right?" Simon shrugged disapprovingly, and said with a rather provocative expression, "Professional, because Bell is professional enough. No matter what they do, I only believe in the most professional." "Professional?" Kinzu nodded, thinking that what this guy said made some sense. Although Gulfstream does have several good helicopters, compared to Gulfstream, which focuses on jet business jets, Bell, which only focuses on producing helicopters, seems to be much more professional. However, Kinzu couldn't help scratching his head when he thought of his purpose today. He just wanted to buy 2 ordinary helicopters. Wasn't it too arrogant to make such a big fuss? In fact, he didn't want to do this, but who made Bell have no branch in Boston? The nearest branch to him was in the Big Apple, and it would take more than 3 hours to get there if he drove. Moreover, he had been going to the Big Apple quite frequently recently, and the 6-hour round trip was not pleasant. So, he decided to go there by helicopter. After all, there was only a sea between Boston and the Big Apple. If he left in the morning, he could get back for lunch after finishing his work there. Kinzu was thinking, but Simon didn't know what his boss was thinking. He was still in an excited state, chattering about the differences between the 2 companies. Kinzu sighed helplessly and stretched out his hand to support his forehead. His excitement had continued since he told him yesterday that he wanted to buy a plane, and there was no sign of it subsiding. Seeing that Simon was immersed in his own world, Kinzu could only curl his lips helplessly, lying on the soft leather seat, squinting his eyes and wandering in the sky. It's true that since he went to Duck Industries last time and asked them to help him install 4 rows of 8 luxurious leather seats in the cockpit, helicopter travel has become much more comfortable. Otherwise, every time he took a helicopter, he either stood or brought his own small stool, which was too embarrassing. Feeling the luxurious seats under him that cost $10,000 each and had full leather and built-in massage functions, Kinzu couldn't help but feel a little regretful. It's a pity that Duck Industries specializes in serving the military, otherwise, he would have bought them directly from them. Soon, the helicopter, under Dale's control, came over New York. After Erica, the co-pilot, identified and indicated the location, the Black Hawk slightly adjusted its direction and flew towards a direction in the suburbs of New York City. Not long after, when Kinzu was half asleep and half awake, the helicopter landed in front of an empty square. "Boss, we're here." Awakened by the somewhat excited voice in his ear, Kinzu rubbed his eyes helplessly and stood up with him. There was no other way. He had been working too late yesterday. If this guy hadn't run to the living room of the villa early this morning and waited, Kinzu might not have gotten up. In comparison, as a woman, Zumengya was much better at recovering her physical strength than him. The beautiful Zhu was also very excited now, and followed Eva to run under the helicopter. Helplessly, Kinzu yawned, and somewhat reluctantly followed Simon down the plane. When he stepped on the ground, looking at the empty and huge square in front of him, and the many helicopters parked around the square, Kinzu's spirit was shocked. "It's so spectacular." Zumengyo looked at the helicopters that appeared in front of her, and her heart was also a little excited. She couldn't help but exclaimed. This kind of grand scene, let alone Kinzu, who had lived an ordinary life since childhood, even she had never seen it before. Yes, there are so many planes. Kinzu followed behind, listening to the sigh of the beautiful lady Zhu, smiled in his heart, and deliberately asked, "Dear, let's buy all the planes here." Hearing Kinzu's question, the beautiful lady Zhu couldn't help but come out of that state of mind, no longer feeling the shock and sight just now. She gave this guy a small roll of the eyes charmingly, and then took his arm and walked towards the young white man who came to meet him in front. "This is Mr. Clean, right? I'm the sales manager here, Peter Horace." The leader, a young white man with blonde hair and blue eyes, who was wearing a suit and tie and looked about 27 or 28 years old, smiled and stretched out his hand. Hearing that the other party was just a sales manager, Qin also showed a smile on his face and gently shook hands with the other party. Although the other party who came to receive him was just a sales manager, Qin was not displeased because they looked down on him, but was relieved. Just now he was still thinking, if the other party's general manager or something came out to greet him personally, then he would only buy 2 ordinary helicopters, which seemed a bit embarrassing. But what if he bought a better one? He was a little reluctant. After all, it was for cowboys, so there was no need for something too good. Besides, he already had a Black Hawk. This guy not only had top-notch performance, but also had guaranteed safety, so he naturally wouldn't think about changing the plane. Even if he wanted to change, he would definitely change to a business jet, and would not consider helicopters. And if he wanted to change to a business jet, he would definitely not choose Bell Helicopter Company. It was the same old saying. The most professional people do the most professional things, and he only believes in professional companies. Therefore, the other party's attitude was just right. It was neither rude nor made Qin feel bad. Chapter 743 Bell, -429. Following the sales manager named Peter, Qin and his party walked into the exhibition hall, where more than a dozen latest models of helicopters were parked. Models. Yes, according to Peter's introduction, the helicopters parked here were actually models made according to a 1-to-1 ratio. Qin curled his lips and looked at the beautiful Zhu beside him. They were a little embarrassed. They actually looked at the model for so long. At this time, Simon, who was walking in front and talking to Peter all the time, suddenly turned back and said loudly to Qin, "Boss, come here quickly, this is Bell's best-selling helicopter, Bell, -407. Simon's voice was very loud, attracting many people in the exhibition hall to pay attention to this side. It is rare to make loud noises in public places in the United States. Because here, gentlemanly manners are emphasized, and people must speak softly. Qin didn't care too much about this. He would not deliberately pretend to be a gentleman, nor would he be too vulgar. As I said, this is the United States, it doesn't matter if I embarrass myself. But if those foreigners think that Chinese people have no quality, that won't work." Thoughts flashed like lightning. After hearing Simon shout, Qin just nodded slightly and quickened his pace to follow. When he got closer, following the direction pointed by Simon, Qin saw a helicopter model with a navy blue color and 2 mixed color stripes on the side. Peter naturally heard Simon's voice. Although he didn't like this black charcoal head very much, he still had to continue working. So, after Qin finished reading it, he smiled and said, "Mr. Clean, Mr. Simon is right. This Bell, -407 is indeed one of our company's current best-selling products." Without waiting for Qin to answer, Peter went straight to the side of the aircraft model, opened the front and rear doors, and introduced, "The main customers of this helicopter are people who need air law enforcement and homeland security. It has great flexibility and can perform various quasi-public tasks, which is very rare among similar helicopters." As he said that, Peter exerted force with his arms and climbed directly into the cockpit, and did not forget to invite, "Mr. Clean, why not come up and experience it?" Qin felt a little itchy when he heard this, and he said something to Zhu, then climbed up as well. "Mr. Clean, this Bell, -407 uses the new HTS, -900 turboshaft engine with a power of 680 kilowatts, and the total weight of the engine is increased to 256 tons. The fuel is stored in 2 interconnected crash-resistant soft tanks, plus an auxiliary tank, and the fuel capacity is greatly increased compared to helicopters of the same type. Moreover, it also uses a low-noise cruise system, using a full-authority digital engine control system to reduce the rotor speed to 93% of the cruise speed, thereby reducing the ARH pass-through noise. Peter was introducing it non-stop, but Qin didn't understand much, and instead felt a little uncomfortable sitting inside. He looked up and down, and then looked back through the partition window, frowning slightly. "What's wrong?" Mr. Qin is not satisfied with this model. Peter was very good at observing people's expressions. Seeing that Qin didn't seem to like this aircraft very much, he immediately stopped his non-stop introduction. Qin didn't hesitate to say this, but nodded directly. "Everything else is fine, but the interior space is a little too small, isn't it?" "Small?" Peter looked around the space of the front and rear cockpits, and complained in his heart. "It's so big, but you still think it's small. Are you going to have a full-scale fight in it?" Although he was complaining in his heart, Peter deeply understood one truth. The customer is God. Since they say it's small, then let it be small. After thinking for a while, Peter thought of something and showed a somewhat weird smile on his face. Mr. Clean, here's a new model. Would you like to come and take a look? New model? Kinzu hesitated. To put it nicely, it's a new model, but to put it bluntly, it's an experimental model. After all, it hasn't really faced the market, and no one knows whether it is good or bad. As if he understood Kinzu's worries, Peter walked down and said with a smile, Mr. Clean, don't worry, this model is actually an improved version of Bell, -407, mainly targeting the size of the cockpit. There is such a model. Kinzu became interested immediately. After all, except for the small cockpit area, he still liked the shape of this Bell, -407. So he didn't hesitate and jumped off the helicopter. Under the guidance of Peter, he walked to a showroom at the back. As Peter lifted a piece of cover from his eyes, a helicopter model with a clear black and white division suddenly appeared in front of Kinzu and others. Unlike the navy blue outside, the upper part of this helicopter is black reflecting metallic light. The lower part has become a white with a huge difference. The black and white colors form a streamlined arc, perfectly dividing the aircraft into two. Moreover, Kinzu seemed to feel that this aircraft was much larger than the Bell, -407 outside. Mr. Clean, this is the latest Bell, -407, the improved Bell, -429. Peter climbed up to the cockpit and motioned Kinzu to come up and feel it. Kinzu was very interested in this helicopter. He climbed up without hesitation. As soon as he entered the cockpit, Kinzu could feel the obvious difference. The cockpit of this Bell, -429 was 2 heads higher than that of the Bell, -407. At this time, Peter saw Kinzu's satisfied smile and took the opportunity to introduce it. Mr. Clean, this Bell, -429 has a larger cabin and cockpit than its prototype, the Model 407. Its cabin volume will be increased from 160 cubic feet, 448 cubic meters, of the Bell, -407 to 220 cubic feet, 616, an increase of nearly 70%. In addition, the new cockpit will be equipped with two 6x8-inch color LCD displays. Most importantly, the Model 429 will adopt 10 new technologies developed for Maple, including an 87.5 kg/cm 2 dual hydraulic system, landing gear, and advanced manufacturing technology for the main rotor. Listening to Peter's endless explanation, Kinzu seemed to understand it, and finally felt a little dizzy, so he said, Well, Mr. Peter, I think you can tell me its key data directly, right? Although interrupted by Kinzu, Peter did not show any unhappiness, but said very sincerely, Mr. Clean, this Bell 429 is equipped with two Pratt & Whitney Canada PW270 turboshaft engines, each with a power of 730 shaft horsepower, and a dual redundant full authority digital engine control system. Matching this is its maximum cruising speed of 263 km per hour, and its economic cruising speed of 255 km per hour. The endurance during economic cruising is 3.8 hours, and the maximum takeoff weight is 3,178 kilograms. Finally, Peter pursed his lips with some reluctance, and a bright smile appeared on his face. So, its standard price is $3.5 million. I took a day off. Today, the company moved, and I was busy all day. I really experienced what it means to have back pain and leg cramps, and I can't even lift my arms. Chapter 744. Prodigal or Wealthy. The north wind was howling, and there seemed to be a faint chill in the air. Boss, this is a bit too expensive, isn't it? Simon, who was sitting on the soft leather seat on the Black Hawk that was crossing the Pacific Ocean, felt a little restless at the moment. Just a few minutes ago, his boss, the generous Tycoon, added 2 more helicopters to the manor. Originally, this was nothing. These days, which fishery doesn't have 1 or 2 helicopters? Not only for his own hobby, but also because with a helicopter, he can better patrol the sea area. After all, the fishery these days is tens or hundreds of nautical miles away, and it is definitely inconvenient without a helicopter. But the problem is, how can other fisheries or ranches use helicopters for work that cost more than $500,000? The small agricultural aircraft used in general ranches usually cost $100,000 or $200,000. Not only that, these small aircraft can not only patrol ranches and fisheries, but also spray pesticides and sell grass seeds, truly achieving one machine for multiple uses. But what about his rich boss? A Bell, minus 429 cost $3.3 million. That's not all. While he was stunned, another Bell, minus 430 that was no worse than his own cost nearly $3 million. Just 2 helicopters cost more than $6 million. Thinking of this, Will found it difficult to breathe. More than $6 million? This is enough to buy a large fishery. But now, it has become 2 helicopters that are only used for work. He dared not imagine whether his heart could bear it when he drove them to work. Will himself fell into deep consciousness unconsciously, and what about the boss who was generous, prodigal, in his eyes? What was he doing at the moment? At this moment, Kinzu was staring outside the ship without blinking, looking at the vast Pacific Ocean and the undulating sea level. Dazed? Yes, Kinzu was in a daze. He heard what Will said, but he didn't want to answer. Why? Because he regretted it a little. At the time, seeing the look in the eyes of the sales manager named Peter, clean, as a passionate young man, directly wrote out a check and threw it in his face. Damn, what's wrong with $3.5 million US? Can't I afford it? Just like that, in Peter's wonderful face, Kinzu pointed to a plane next to him and wrote out a check. I want this one too. The money was spent happily, and Peter's face became very ugly. Even in the end, the person in charge of the exhibition hall came out in person, and there was a lot of compliments and greetings. But in the end, Kinzu reacted. Damn, I bought this plane specifically for others to drive. But now at this price, I'm reluctant to drive it myself, let alone for others. Somewhat depressed, he made an appointment with the general manager of the exhibition hall for the delivery time, and Kinzu boarded his helicopter in the eyes of a group of staff looking at the local tyrant. However, on the way back, Kinzu felt a little depressed no matter how he thought about it. Although Peter and others were very respectful to him in the end, Kinzu knew that they must have regarded him as some kind of mover rich. This made Kinzu very entangled. What does this mean? It means that he doesn't have enough money. Or in other words, he doesn't have a social status in the United States that matches his wealth. If a duck or cook came this time, and they made an appointment in advance. Not to mention the general manager of the exhibition hall, even the technical engineers of the headquarters would probably rush over overnight to do the most comprehensive technical inspection for them. And what about me? I have made an appointment in advance, but who is going to receive me? Just a sales manager. What is a sales manager? It's the kind of small boss who has 2 or 3 salesmen under him. How big is the difference between them and the general manager of the exhibition hall? There is a world of difference. MMP, after all, I still don't have enough money. Kinzu sighed deeply. But in his heart, he suddenly had an irrepressible impulse. He wants to make money and have a corresponding social status. He wants to go out to do things without queuing and dealing with the minions at the bottom. When he goes out to buy a house, he wants the developer to come in person. When he went out to buy a car, he wanted the car dealer to receive him personally. When he went out to eat, he wanted to go to any restaurant at any time and any grade, without making an appointment. Everything can be summed up in one point, that is, face recognition. As the helicopter slowly landed, Dale's cold voice came from the headset, and Kinzu finally woke up from his meditation. Unbuckling the seatbelt, seeing Simon still looking uneasy, Kinzu couldn't help but smile and patted the black man on the shoulder. Simon, you can't do this, it's just a few $1 million, it scares you? Simon heard this and couldn't help grinning and said with a wry smile, "This, boss, I have never seen so much money in my life." "Don't worry, Simon, you'll see it." Kinzu stood up, stretched, and said in an extremely confident tone, "As long as you follow me well, a few $1 million is absolutely not a problem for you." Watching the not-too-tall figure jump off the helicopter easily, Simon didn't know why, but a sense of confidence surged in his heart for no reason. Yes, following such a generous boss, you will also have it with just a few $1 million. After entering the villa, Kinzu picked up the beautiful Zhu who was lazily lying on the sofa and fiddling with a tablet and kissed her hard a few times. "Baby, I have decided that I will open our restaurant into a chain and open it in every corner of the world." "Huh? Clean, what's wrong with you?" Zhu, who was originally a little bit coquettish, immediately stretched out her hand to touch his forehead with some worry when she heard Kinzu's ambition. "It was fine when she left this morning, why is it like this when she came back? Was it because of the wind on the plane? I say, little girl, don't you trust me so much?" After grabbing Zhu hand and kissing it twice, Kinzu hugged her tighter with a bit of laughter and tears. "No." Zhu blinked her big eyes, showing a naughty smile and said, I think you look a little strange today. What's wrong? What's the matter? Don't mention it. I went to buy a plane today, but I was looked down upon. Speaking of this, Kinzu sighed deeply, and his whole body collapsed on the sofa like a deflated ball. What's the matter? The beautiful Zhu frowned slightly and said angrily, Dear, tell me. Let's go and sue them. Thank you to Flying Wolf, the 7th Empire of the World, Lonely to Lost, and Legend of Wolf Warrior for your rewards and support. Thank you to Sheddy for the 999 book coins reward. Thank you to Wang Wei for the 5,000 starting coins reward, and congratulations to Wang Wei for becoming the helmsman of this book. I owe you more chapters. I remember that when Liu Yun started the book, Wang Wei supported Liu Yun, and I am very grateful. Si est escuchando esta novela en un canal distinto a mundo fanfic novelas, significat lo descarga and y subir en cines fuerzos invitamos cordialmente a visitar nuestro canal. Mundo fanfic novelas all encontras la versión original de esta historia y podrás explorar muchas otras novelas de diversos narradores. Te esperamos para sumergirte en un mundo de novelas incredibles. Chapter 745 Arrangements for Zhu Mengyo. Kinzu rolled his eyes, raised his hand and slapped the guy, saying unhappily, Why Su? He didn't curse anyone directly. Will the judge convict him for this? Zhu Mengyo stuck out her tongue playfully, and wrapped her arms around Kinzu's neck, saying in dissatisfaction, Even if we don't sue him, we'll let Sister Dale cripple him. They dare to look down on you, and we must never forgive them. Although the way the beautiful ladies you comforted people was a big fake, Kinzu still felt warm in his heart, and it felt so good. So, he held the beauty in his arms horizontally on his legs and roughly told her what happened today. When Zhu Mengyo heard that Kinzu spent millions of dollars to buy 2 helicopters for the fishermen, she didn't show too much surprise. However, when she understood Kinzu's idea and that he really wanted to make a career, the beautiful ladies you showed exceptional happiness. There was no way, although she liked Kinzu very much, she also liked this quiet and peaceful life. But such a life will get boring after a long time. Besides, who doesn't like their man to be a man who is upright and capable of creating a career? When she was with Kinzu at first, she felt more grateful than she liked him. After a period of contact, she really fell in love with Kinzu, liked his cheerful personality, and took care of her in every way. But the previous Kinzu was good, but he lacked the determination that a young man should have. Perhaps because of his poor family conditions since childhood, Kinzu now gives people the feeling that he is stable and has no such drive. But now, Zhu Mengyo has seen another side of Kinzu. It turns out that he also has his moments of sharpness. Mengyo, what do you think of my idea? After talking for a long time, Kinzu felt that his mouth was a little dry. He took the water handed over by Eva and took a sip, smiled at the beauty in his arms, and waited for her answer. Of course. After waking up from her contemplation, the beautiful Zhu also retracted her gaze from staring at Kinzu, nodded quickly, and said, Clean, I think what you said makes sense. Let's start with the restaurant chain. Yeah. Kinzu imagined the wonderful life in the future, and a bright smile appeared on his face. Let's start with the restaurant chain. It just so happens that the cards in the ranch can be sold after the new year, which can just support the expansion of our restaurant. The beautiful Zhu had long been attracted by the temperament that Kinzu showed at that moment, and she didn't even hear what Kinzu said clearly. It was not until a moment later that she came back to her senses and quickly agreed. Well, let's do this, but I think you can't be the only one busy. Why is it alone? Kinzu gently stroked the beautiful woman's smooth back, smiled and teased. Don't you have a big beauty to accompany me? I'm talking to you about business, be honest. Noticing Kinzu's malicious eyes, the beautiful Zhu felt a little embarrassed and annoyed, and directly used her ultimate killer move. She pinched a small piece of soft flesh on his waist and twisted it counterclockwise. Hiss, Mengyo, let's be gentle, can't I admit my mistake? HMPH, I told you not to be honest. With a coquettish cry, the beautiful Zhu snuggled into Kinzu's arms and said with some longing, What I mean is, I don't know anything about opening a restaurant, and I can't help much, but I can always be idle at home, so I might as well do something I'm familiar with. Oh? Kinzu's expression became serious this time, and he wondered, Isn't it fun to stay at home? Why are you thinking about being busy? Zhu Mengyo shook her head, chuckled and said, Of course it's comfortable at home, but everyone should have their own things to do, so that they don't feel empty and bored. Kinzu expressed his understanding of this. He was also willing to let Zhu Mengyo have a job of her own so that she would not be idle at home. Have you thought about it? What do you want to do? Zhu Mengyo snuggled in Qin Zhu's arms and smiled playfully. Of course, a lawyer, it's my specialty, and I also have Surui and David. I believe I can do well. Hearing Zhu Mengyo's words, Qin Zhu's mouth twitched. Sure enough, this is what she chose. But, the lawyer industry. Qin Zhu really didn't want to let the beautiful Zhu get in. Because the lawyer industry, in general, is still a service industry, you need to act according to the client's mood. Sometimes, you not only have to help the party you don't like, but also do your best to win the case. Because you can't lose, it's about your honor, the reputation of your law firm, and future interests. Thoughts came to his mind one after another, making Qin Zhu feel dizzy, and there was a tendency to develop into a paste. How is it? Okay. Seeing Qin Zhu didn't say anything, the somewhat disappointed beautiful Zhu also began to use this kind of coquettish mode that makes people's skin drop. Okay, of course. In a trance, Qin Zhu was bombarded unconsciously and couldn't stand it. He agreed without thinking about anything. But then, he reacted. No, it should be said that he was directly awakened by the surprised beautiful Zhu. He agreed to it himself. He wanted to regret it, but Qin Zhu opened his mouth and couldn't say anything. Could it be that he said, "Wife, I was just joking, you should stay at home honestly, I'm the only one making money outside." If he said this, Qin Zhu estimated that the angry beautiful Zhu would be able to deal with him without anyone else. This. Ahem, Qin Zhu hesitated for a long time and finally spoke. But when he was about to continue speaking, he was suppressed by the beautiful Zhu. Qin, you promised me, right? I can help you too. We will go to Revere to pick a good location later. Seeing that the beautiful Zhu ended to pick a location with great interest, Qin Zhu knew that he could not wait any longer. Just as he was about to speak, an idea flashed in his mind. He hurriedly said, "Well, Mengyo, there is no rush to open the store. We still have to discuss it with Chen Mu when the time comes. As for you, what's wrong with me? You promised me to let me help you." Zhu Mengyo pouted and looked at Qin Zhu with dissatisfaction, as if she knew that this guy never said good news. Qin Zhu smiled mysteriously and asked back, "Mengyo, you were going to help me, right?" Zhu Mengyo thought about it for a while, and felt that there was no trap in this sentence, so she nodded her head. "Yes, I just want to help you share some of the burden." Qin Zhu smiled and said in a voice full of temptation, "Mengyo, there is no shortage of lawyers here now, but there is a lack of a very important person. Are you willing to come and try?" Chapter 746 Chen Mu's Surprise. What do you do? Zhu Mengyo sat up from Qin Zhu's arms, staring at him suspiciously, wanting to see if this guy was just trying to fool her again. Accountant. Qin Zhu reached out his hand, gently lifted the beautiful woman's delicate chin, and said with a sly smile, "My huge manor doesn't even have a financial department. Aren't you afraid that your husband's family business will be turned into an empty shell?" "Well, that's true." Frowning, Zhu Mengyo pondered for a moment and felt that what Qin Zhu said made sense. But on second thought, she became a little sad again. "Honey, you have such a big ranch, and you want to open a restaurant, but I am alone, how can I handle it?" "You." Qin Zhu pinched Zhu Mengyo's cute little face in annoyance, and said with a smile, "Don't you know how to hire someone? Are you going to do it yourself?" Although our family is not very rich, it is not to the point where the hostess can save money by doing everything herself. "Oh, right." Zhu Mengyo stuck out her tongue embarrassedly and kissed Qin Zhu on the old face. "Honey, you are still smart, this is a reward for you." Qin Zhu was a little angry because of Zhu Mengyo's teasing. He was about to kill this girl on the spot, but she jumped away in advance. Blinking her big eyes at Qin Zhu, Zhu Mengyo smiled cunningly. "Dear, you should think about how to open a restaurant first. I'll go and get familiar with the US tax laws first." Qin Zhu waved his hand helplessly and said unhappily, Go, I'll deal with you in the evening." After the beautiful Zhu's silver bell-like laughter faded away, Qin Zhu calmed down and began to think about how to run his own business. In total, he currently owns 2 ranches, a fishery, and 2 restaurants. Well, okay, let's not count the one in my hometown for now, let's count the one in the United States first. It can be said that the only asset Qin Zhu can show off at present, apart from the somewhat unfamiliar Pingo shares, is a Michelin 3-star restaurant. After thinking for a while, Qin Zhu took out his mobile phone and called Chen Mu directly. "Brother Chen, when are you free? Come to the ranch and let's have a good chat." When Chen Mu received Qin Zhu's call, he was checking the business report for the past 2 days in the office. Although he was a little confused, he didn't say much, but agreed very straightforwardly. I know, boss, I'll go there in the afternoon. It was said to be in the afternoon, but Kinzu had just finished lunch when Chen Mu's black Mercedes-Benz had already driven into the ranch. Under the reflection of the sun, the car stopped steadily at the door of the villa. The car door opened, and Chen Mu, who was dressed in a black coat and looked mature and steady, walked down with a smile. Since he and Kinzu started to run the restaurant together, Chen Mu's whole change can be said to be earth-shaking. Although he was the chef at Meritage and before, he was the real power figure in the entire restaurant besides the boss. But after all, he was also an employee and also ate with the boss's salary. This made him always feel a lack of confidence in daily management. After all, a leader without the right to speak is definitely not so convincing. But since he started to cooperate with Kinzu in business, Chen Mu could clearly feel that the eyes of those employees looked at him differently. Those who used to call him brothers and sisters, now see him, they can't help but be a little restrained. Because he is not an employee now, he is also that boss now. Although he is just a small shareholder, he is still the boss, and he also has a share in this restaurant. Moreover, Kinzu really gave him full power and did not interfere with the management of the restaurant at all, which undoubtedly further consolidated his prestige. Therefore, Chen Mu is grateful to Kinzu from the bottom of his heart. This is why, as soon as he received the call, he rushed over without saying a word. Because Kinzu is not only his boss, but also his benefactor and his mentor. Seeing Chen Mu come in, Kinzu put down the teacup in his hand, stood up from under the porch, and greeted him with a smile on his face. Brother Chen, why are you here so early? Chen Mu smiled and hugged Kinzu casually. Boss, you summoned me personally, how dare I not come quickly? He smiled and punched Chen Mu, and Kinzu didn't say anything, and took him to the porch. Arriving under the porch, Kinzu motioned him to sit on the lounge chair opposite, and took another teacup, personally filled a cup of tea for him and handed it over. Chen Mu was not polite, and there was no need for unnecessary politeness between them. After taking the teacup, he took a sip gently, squinted his eyes and felt it for a while, and then he exhaled gently. Good tea, astringent but not bitter. Every time I drink it, it makes people linger. Putting down the teacup, Chen Mu smiled and asked, Boss, you didn't just ask me to come here to drink tea, did you? Although this tea is really good, I have some too. Kinzu smiled and waved his hand. No hurry, you take a rest first. Chen Mu shook his head helplessly. Since Kinzu didn't say anything, he had to patiently continue to drink tea. The warm sunshine was particularly rare in this winter afternoon. The two men sat under the porch, put down everything outside, and slowly tasted the fragrant tea. After a long time, when the two people's moods slowly calmed down, Kinzu put down the teacup in his hand. Brother Chen, how is the restaurant business now? Are you still busy? Chen Mu also put down his teacup and nodded with a smile. Not bad, it's full every day, but the staff is okay. After all, the restaurant's area is there. Then what do you think? If we need to expand the scale of the restaurant now, should we expand on the original basis or open a branch? Boss, you want to expand the scale? Chen Mu's heart jumped, and he looked at Kinzu opposite with some surprise. Why would he have the idea of expanding the scale? When he asked him to acquire this restaurant before, didn't he still look very reluctant? Although he saw Chen Mu's surprised expression, Kinzu did not mean to explain, but nodded affirmatively. He was able to express his determination to make a career and be frank with Zhu Mengyo without reservation, because the beautiful Zhu was his designated wife. But facing Chen Mu, he didn't need to explain so much. After all, being looked down upon is not a glorious thing, and there is no need to publicize it everywhere. Chen Mu was not surprised that he didn't wait for Kinzu's answer. The question just now was just a blurt out in his surprise, and he didn't think Kinzu needed to explain anything to him. However, facing Kinzu's question, he really needed to think carefully. Chapter 747 General Manager of the Group Company. The winter sun was wantonly splashing on the pasture and shining on people. It was so warm that people couldn't help but want to have a good sleep. But under the porch of the villa, neither of the two people sitting next to each other was sleepy. Kinzu picked up the teacup again, not paying attention to Chen Mu beside him, but looking at the Appalachian Mountains in the distance. There seemed to be a kind of magic there, making Kinzu not want to move his eyes away every time he cast his eyes there. Although he didn't pay attention, Kinzu knew that Chen Mu should be very entangled now, right? Because whether it was expansion or rebuilding a branch, it meant that he had to pay again. After all, this store was a joint venture. As a major shareholder, Kinzu wanted to invest money to build a new store, so as a small shareholder, he had to either invest money or have his shares diluted. There was no other choice. After thinking for a long time, Chen Mu shook his head helplessly, smiled bitterly and asked, "Boss, what do you think?" Kinzu took a sip of tea, put down the teacup and looked directly into Chen Mu's eyes, and said with a smile, "Meritage Restaurant, I'm going to expand it. All the offices on the second floor will be demolished, and I will build you an office on the third floor. But if that happens, we won't have enough chefs." Chen Mu frowned. "Recruit." Kinzu waved his hand and said decisively, "If there are not enough chefs, then recruit. If there are not enough waiters, then recruit. As long as we can make money back, then spend it as much as possible." Chen Mu nodded helplessly. He was just a small shareholder. Although he had full management power over the restaurant, this kind of expansion was indeed beneficial to the restaurant. He had no reason to refuse. However, after this time, it was estimated that his shares would be diluted to what extent. Kinzu just smiled mysteriously at Chen Mu's frustration, but didn't say anything, but continued to ask, "Brother Chen, what do you think about Meritage Restaurant opening a branch?" "Open a branch? Hasn't it been expanded?" Chen Mu looked up in surprise. He originally thought that it would just be a matter of expanding the scale, but looking at the current situation, does this guy want to continue to open branches? Kinzu smiled and nodded to confirm his idea. "Yes, open a branch." Chen Mu heard this, hesitated for a moment, and still shook his head and said, "Clean, I don't agree with your idea." "Oh? Why?" Kinzu didn't get angry, but looked over curiously, very curious about his reason. Chen Mu organized his words, and under Kinzu's curious gaze, he said very sincerely, "Clean, the reason why Meritage Restaurant can become a Michelin 3-star restaurant is due to various reasons, not just because of its scale or decoration." "So what?" Kinzu didn't understand very well, so he asked directly. "So?" Chen Mu was a little speechless for a moment, not knowing how to describe it. Finally, after thinking for a while, he gestured and explained, "Clean, you can think of Meritage Restaurant as a brand, a very unique brand. Only in this location, run by these people, can a high-end restaurant be formed. In other words, even if you open a branch store and hang up the Meritage Restaurant sign, it will give customers a different feeling, and Michelin will not agree with you to do so. Let's put it this way, the 3-star rating they give only refers to this store, not the Meritage Restaurant brand." Now, Kinzu understood. According to Chen Mu, if he opened a new store, he could no longer use the name Meritage Restaurant. And this newly opened restaurant is no longer a Michelin-starred restaurant, but just an ordinary Western restaurant. Now, Kinzu frowned. "Why can't we use this name? Don't we have the trademark for this name?" Chen Mu shrugged and said helplessly, "It's not that we can't use it at all. As long as we can gain a foothold before the Michelin rating agency finds out, it's okay." "What will happen if they find out?" Kinzu asked with a hint of luck. "Revoke the rating." Kinzu was speechless. Although he admired Michelin's dedication, he would definitely not be in a good mood when he encountered such a thing. Michelin rating, how many restaurants can't get it even if they ask for it? Is it really worth it to lose this rating for a few new stores? Kinzu shook his head. It was definitely not worth it. His original idea was to quickly build several Western restaurants and lay out the entire Boston business district with the brand of Meritage Restaurant. But now if he can't use this name, the brand effect will not work at all. Feeling a little irritated, Kinzu took a deep breath and sipped the hot tea to calm down his restless mood. "Is there no solution? Or can I only rebuild a brand and then slowly build it up?" Chen Mu nodded and shook his head. "What do you mean?" Kinzu looked at this guy with some annoyance. He was still hungry at this time and really wanted to beat him up. In Kinzu's murderous eyes, Chen Mu was not in a hurry. He drank a sip of tea leisurely and said with a smile, "Boss, you can acquire a few more Michelin restaurants and then unify them to form a catering group. In the future, the newly built restaurants can directly use the banner of this group." Kinzu's eyes lit up and he almost couldn't help but applaud. It has to be said that this method is the most direct and effective. Just like luxury brands such as Hermes, many luxury brands are actually one company, but they are divided into several grades. But as long as people see things from the same company as these luxury brands, they will naturally think that their quality is similar. When the time comes, just put the group name on the restaurant name, I believe the effect will definitely be good. Brother Chen, your suggestion is really good. Qinzu looked at Chen Mu beside him happily, and it was time to give him a reassurance. Without waiting for him to say anything else, Qinzu suddenly stood up and stretched out his right hand towards Chen Mu. Brother Chen, I now solemnly invite you to serve as the general manager of the soon-to-be-established Tycoon catering group. I wonder if you're interested? Chen Mu was stunned for a moment, stood up in some surprise, and pointed at himself. Me? General manager of the group? Qinzu nodded and said with a smile. It's called the general manager of the group, but so far, there is only one Meritage restaurant. I hope you don't mind. No, no. Chen Mu waved his hands repeatedly. He still couldn't react now. He was promoted. He became the general manager of the group company. Chapter 748 Lis Ballet. After seeing Chen Mu waff, Qinzu fell into deep thought. It is undeniable that Chen Mu's suggestion was correct. But the problem came again. That is, how should they acquire those Michelin-starred restaurants that have already formed a scale? As we all know, a Michelin-starred restaurant, as long as it is properly managed, it is not an exaggeration to say that it makes a fortune every day. So under normal circumstances, the owner of a Michelin-starred restaurant will not easily sell the restaurant in his hand. This is an old hen that lays golden eggs. Of course, people like Roger Ferguson who sell restaurants because of failed investments are exceptions. Clean, what's wrong? Zhu Mengyo, who came out of the villa, saw Qinzu frowning and thinking, and couldn't help but come to him and sit down with concern. Qinzu came back to his senses, smiled and took the beautiful woman's jade hand, and kissed her gently. Nothing, just want to acquire a few restaurants, but don't know how to start. Oh? What restaurant? Zhu Mengyo's eyes flashed with a trace of silence, so he started to act so quickly. Qinzu did not hide anything. He stroked the smooth and tender hands of the beautiful woman and told the curious Zhu Mengyo the method they had just discussed. This is really difficult. The beautiful Zhu frowned slightly and was a little hesitant. In fact, there is a way, but the key to the problem is still money. For example, the original value of this restaurant is 100 million. If you spend 100 million to acquire it, the other party may not pay attention to you. Some people even think you are teasing him. But if you offer 110 million, they will seriously consider it. If you offer 150 million, they will definitely be tempted. If you can offer 200 million, then this matter is basically stable. After all, businessmen pursue profits. As long as it is not something with special meaning or something that is difficult for them to give up, there is nothing that cannot be sold. But, in this way, their cost is too high. Qinzu and the other person obviously thought of this, looked at each other, and smiled bigly. Wanting others to give up their love, snatching food from the tiger's mouth, and not knowing how much it will cost. Qinzu didn't have to wait too long. At noon that day, Qinzu received a call from Chen Mu. Chen Mu's voice was very excited on the phone, laughing and saying, "Boss, we're lucky. I asked around and the owner of Lis Ballet seems to be interested in selling the restaurant." Really? Qinzu sat up from the sofa with some surprise. Yes, boss, it seems that this matter has something to do with this. Related to us? Qinzu was a little speechless. Did this guy know that he was a restaurant, so he planned to sell it? As if knowing Qinzu's thoughts, Chen Mu on the other end of the phone smiled and explained. It's not that the owner of Lis Ballet is a prophet, but this restaurant is not too far from us. They are in the same business district, so the recent business is a bit bad. Huh? What do you mean? Hearing Chen Mu's words, Qinzu suddenly had a vague idea in his mind. But when he thought about it carefully, he was still confused. It was just a little short, but he couldn't get it through. Yes, because we are in the same business circle, we have attracted a lot of customers. Chen Mu said, laughing excitedly. All this has changed because of his own efforts. So, now is a good time to start. Seeing Chen Mu so excited, Qinzu simply stopped thinking about what happened just now, and asked seriously. Yes, boss, how about I go and test his mouth first? Seeing that Qinzu was very interested, Chen Mu asked with some expectation. Go, call me when you are sure. After hanging up the phone, Qinzu's mind was still thinking about the series of things that happened just now. He had a hunch that he must have overlooked something. But what could it be? Scratching his hair a little irritably, Qinzu felt that he was only a thin layer away from the truth. But it was such a thin film that he couldn't break no matter how hard he tried. In the end, Qinzu, who was a little dizzy, simply stopped thinking about it and strode upstairs to the bedroom. There was a rosebud waiting for his caress. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. When Qin Zhu was still lying on the sofa leisurely, hugging the beautiful Zhu, eating and watching TV, the phone rang again. He took out his phone and looked at it. Qin Zhu's face, which was originally smiling, suddenly became serious. "Brother Chen, I hope it's good news this time." There was silence on the phone, and then there was a burst of smirk, and then it seemed that he thought of something, and then he said excitedly, "Boss, it succeeded. Mr. Larry Richards agreed to our conditions." "Oh? Really?" Qin Zhu asked in disbelief. In the past 3 days, Chen Mu would call almost every day to report the situation. But every time, when Qin Zhu picked up the phone with expectation, Chen Mu's frustrated voice would come from inside. As time went by, Qin Zhu wanted to hang up when he saw Chen Mu's phone call. "Yes, boss, $55 million, including the shop with an area of several hundred square meters, all belong to you." Qin Zhu smiled contentedly when he heard this. However, thinking of the chef at Bliss Ballier, Qin Zhu asked anxiously, "Brother Chen, what did Mr. Frank Wagner say? Is he going to resign or continue to stay in the restaurant?" Speaking of this, Chen Mu was a little embarrassed. This was also one of the people he was trying to communicate with in the past few days. "Hurry up and say it, what are you worried about?" Qin Zhu became a little impatient when he didn't hear the answer he wanted. "Well, boss, Mr. Frank also wants to invest in the restaurant." After being urged again and again, Chen Mu said a little embarrassedly, "Want to invest in the restaurant?" Qin Zhu couldn't help but frowned. There were many reasons for letting Chen Mu invest in the restaurant. One was because he introduced this restaurant to him. Secondly, it was because of his fellow countryman's face. As a fellow Chinese, he would definitely help if he could. But the main reason was that Qin Zhu was too lazy at the time. He didn't want to take care of the restaurant's affairs at all, and he didn't expect the restaurant to make money. That's why he agreed to let Chen Mu buy 10% of the shares for $5 million. But now it's different. First of all, I'm going to do a big job, and it's impossible for me to give the fat meat to others to enjoy. Secondly, if this restaurant allows the chef to invest, what about next time? You know, although Boston is big, New York is big, but the circle of chefs is not big. Especially this kind of top chef. Ask for leave, and another day off. I just moved into the dormitory today. I'm exhausted. Chapter 749 Acquisition. As Qin Zhu expected, after he decided not to accept the chef's investment, Bliss Ballier's chef Frank made it clear that he would no longer serve Bliss Ballier. The acquisition was immediately deadlocked. Clean, otherwise, let's let him invest a little. After receiving the news, Zhu Mengyo persuaded Qin Zhu. In response, Qin Zhu shook his head calmly. "No, this gap cannot be opened. Once he gives in, the subsequent acquisition will be more difficult." Zhu Mengyo frowned cutely, and she also felt that what Qin Zhu said made sense. But, it's not a good thing to be stuck here now. Just when Zhu Mengyo was frowning and thinking about how to solve this problem, Qin Zhu had already picked up the phone. "Brother Chen, tell a guy that it is impossible to invest, but he can give him 10% of the net income of this store every month." Chen Mu on the other end of the phone was overjoyed when he heard this. He believed that Frank would agree to the conditions offered by Qin Zhu. Although this is not a shareholding, the treatment is almost the same as that after the shareholding. Moreover, he does not have to pay a part of the shareholding money, and he can enjoy the treatment that is almost the same as that after the shareholding. It is a good deal no matter how you look at it. Well, except that he does not have the shares of this store. After all, as long as there is no share, he will always be a worker, and whatever the boss says is the case. Of course, as far as it is concerned, this condition is indeed more favorable to Frank. This is also one of the reasons why Qin Zhu is confident that he can make Frank surrender. Sure enough, Frank, who received the call from Chen Mu, agreed without any hesitation. He does not have to pay for it himself, and there are dividends every month. Where can you find such a good treatment? The money of these Chinese tycoons is easy to make. After hanging up the phone, Frank couldn't help but think with emotion. On the other side, Qin Zhu, who received the call from Chen Mu, packed up his things and set off for Boston with his beautiful wife and concubines early the next morning. Well, of course, there is a beautiful wife, but what about concubines? Qin Zhu secretly glanced at the extremely hot female Special Forces soldier who was flying the Black Hawk. This one should be considered half, right? Zhu Mengyo didn't know what the man next to her was thinking now, otherwise, she would probably kick him off the plane. However, the beautiful Zhu was obviously not in the mood to pay attention to these things. She was now looking nervously, flipping through a document in her hand, one by one, and muttering in a lack of confidence. Clean, can I do it alone? I haven't studied American law much. Kinzu came back to his senses from his complicated thoughts, smiled and comforted. Dear, I believe you can do it. You are someone who has thought about opening a law firm, how can you not handle this matter? Being provoked by Kinzu, the beautiful Zhu was a little annoyed, raised her head, and rolled her eyes in dissatisfaction. I want to open a law firm, but I am not asked to sort out the contract terms myself. Besides, don't we have Rui and Tongton? Hearing this, Kinzu couldn't help but laugh. No wonder this girl is so confident about opening a law firm. It turns out that there is someone behind her. Don't worry, this is just a simple acquisition contract. You can just follow it with the other party's lawyer when the time comes. Zhu Mengyo nodded her head. Now she had no choice. Since she was here, she could only treat a dead horse as a living one. Kinzu smiled mysteriously when he saw this. What he didn't say was that David had already read this contract and told him all the issues that should be paid attention to. As long as he paid attention, there would be no problem on Zhu Mengyo's side. However, he didn't say it out loud, just let the beautiful Zhu exercise. Soon, the Black Hawk that set off from the ranch arrived over Boston. When it stopped steadily on the roof of Meritage Restaurant, Chen Mu, who had been waiting below, greeted it with a surprised face. Boss, it's getting more and more convenient for you to go out now, huh? Kinzu smiled awkwardly and touched his nose. He also felt that he was getting lazier and lazier. However, he was now very thick-skinned. After a little embarrassment, he immediately returned to normal. Brother Chen, where is the contract signed? Hearing Kinzu talking about business, Chen Mu had to put away the idea of continuing to tease him and answered honestly. Boss, the contract is signed at Les Ballet. You can go and see the new store. Kinzu nodded and took the lead toward downstairs, and asked at the same time. Okay, then you see when we go there. Chen Mu first nodded slightly at Zhu Mengyo, who followed him off the plane. This is the boss's wife, and she must not be ignored. After saying hello, he turned around and followed her, and replied. Boss, I agreed to sign the contract at 10 o'clock in the morning. Now there is more than an hour before the time. How about you take a rest here now? Speaking of this, Chen Mu's mouth was full of bitterness. He thought Kinzu would drive here. It would take more than an hour to get from the ranch to Boston, so he left enough time to prevent any accidents on the road. Unfortunately, he didn't expect that Kinzu didn't even drive the car now, but flew here directly. Now, it's a bit embarrassing. Has he been wasting so much time here? Kinzu obviously thought of this problem, and his footsteps paused. He touched his chin and thought for a long time, then slapped his thigh and said with a smile. That's perfect. Isn't the signing location in Les Ballier? Then let's go there and wait for them. Isn't that a bad idea? Chen Mu hesitated when he heard this. After all, they are here as representatives of the capital side to acquire this restaurant. If they come here to wait for people, wouldn't it seem that they care too much about this restaurant? This has a great impact on the subsequent negotiation. Sensing Chen Mu's hesitation, Kinzu immediately understood his idea and said with a smile. We're just going there to inspect and taste Frank's cooking skills to see if he is worth my 10% share of the net profit. Faced with Kinzu's reason, Chen Mu had no way to refute it, so he simply led the way. The group walked out of Meritage Restaurant, and at the door, several people saw a black Mercedes driven by Chen Mu and drove to the location of Les Ballet. Because the interior space of the Mercedes is relatively small, after Erica took the initiative to sit in the front, Kinzu accompanied that two beauties in the back seat. On the left was the beautiful Zhu, who was studying the contract, looking nervous and having no time to deal with others. On the right sat the female Special Forces soldier, Dale, who had a hot body but a somewhat cold personality. Chapter 750 Frank. As the Mercedes-Benz drove through downtown Boston, Kinzu, who was sitting in the back seat, began to get restless. He didn't know why, but every time he saw Dale's calm expression, Kinzu felt like a cat scratching his heart, and always wanted to tease her. So, while the beautiful Zhu was concentrating on studying the contract, Kinzu started. Feeling the harassment of her boss, Dale turned her head and glanced at her, but did not move. Kinzu was happy to see this, but the next moment, a slender jade hand gently covered his big hand. Then, he couldn't move. He pulled hard twice, but Dale's white jade-like hands seemed to have a lot of power. No matter how Kinzu struggled, she didn't move at all. Helplessly, Qinzhu had to roll his eyes, lie on his back in the back seat, and admit defeat. This scene has happened more than once. However, the good thing is that although he couldn't get any closer, his big hand would not be taken away by her. Perhaps, she was afraid of waking up the beautiful Lady Zhu beside her? Qinzhu thought so. As for the reason, he had no idea to think about it for the time being, because the luxury Mercedes-Benz that was moving forward had slowly stopped. "Boss, we're here, right over there." Chen Mu, who was sitting in the front driver's seat, pointed to one side. Following his gesture, Qinzhu, who had just come to his senses, also looked over. "Boss, this is the most noble commercial residential area in Boston, Back Bay." Chen Mu introduced it in front, pointed over there, and said with a smile, "See, there, this ballet's facade is quite low-key, and there is no feeling of noise at all." Qinzhu looked over and saw a 2-meter wide gate next to a street with few people. Above the porch, this ballet was hung prominently. "This is really strange." Qinzhu smacked his dry lips and asked curiously, "The flow of people here is so poor, will anyone come?" Chen Mu ordered after hearing that, and said with a smile, "Although the flow of people here is not large, this is a high-end residential area." Qinzhu curled his lips. "With this amount of flow of people, even if there is, it will not be much." Opening the car door, Qinzhu and others walked down. "Boss, you guys go up first, I'll go park the car first." Qinzhu also understood what he meant. After all, this was definitely not the first time he came here to discuss the acquisition. Maybe as soon as he showed up, someone would immediately notify the manager. In that case, there would be no point for Qinzhu's visit this time. Without waiting for Chen Mu, Qinzhu took the lead and walked in directly. Pushing open the door, a very sweet-looking big mare smiled and guided Qinzhu to an elevator. Following the guidance of the beautiful big mare, Qinzhu and others took the elevator to the 3rd floor. As soon as they walked out of the elevator, a man in a suit and tie, who looked like a manager, came over and asked very politely, "Sir, miss, do you have an appointment?" Qinzhu smiled and reported a number. After waiting for the man who looked like a manager to check with the tablet, he smiled and said, "Mr. Clean, please come over here, you are the first table of guests today." After hearing this, Qinzhu couldn't help but chuckle. It was just past 9 o'clock and he came here to wait. How could he not be the first? Just when Qinzhu and his friends were about to follow the manager inside, another big man with short hair came over and took their coats to the storage room for storage. The other guy who followed him asked unwillingly, "Mr. Clean, wouldn't you like something to drink? Wine?" Qinzhu looked up at him warily. The man nodded calmly, and then led a few people to the wine counter. After getting the wine and sitting down, Qinzhu smiled and nodded, "The service here is really good and worthy of praise." Zhu Mengye also put aside the contract for the time being, and nodded, "Yes, the service consciousness is strong, and they are more polite." Qinzhu turned his head, looked at Dale beside him, and asked with a smile, "Dale, what do you think?" Dale's expression was still indifferent. She nodded slightly and praised, "It's really good." Several people chatted for a while beside the table, and the dishes began to come up one after another. "Boss, what do you think of this place?" Chen Mu walked over quietly and asked with a smile. Qinzhu nodded and gave a thumbs up with a smile. "Brother Chen, you're indeed a qualified general manager. I didn't make a mistake." Even though he knew that Qinzhu was exaggerating, Chen Mu couldn't help but start to be happy from the bottom of his heart. After all, this store was run by him alone. From the initial selection of the store, to the first trial, to the continuous negotiations, and now to the upcoming harvest of the fruits of victory, how could he not be excited? Just as Qinzhu and others were talking in a low voice, there was a commotion next to them, and a middle-aged white man wearing a chef's white coat and a chef's hat walked over quickly. From a distance, this guy opened his arms and hugged Chen Mu, who was not in a hurry to dodge. "Ha, my dear Chen, why didn't you tell me you were here?" Qinzhu got goosebumps all over his body after being teased by this guy. He stared at the white man in surprise, wanting to see how this guy could like Chen Mu. Just as Qinzhu was wondering, Chen Mu's helpless voice also rang out. "Hey, my dear Frank, if you don't leave, be careful that our boss will give you a hard time." "Hard time? Boss?" Frank repeated it again with some confusion, not understanding what Chen Mu meant by these words. Seeing this, Chen Mu smiled and pointed at Qinzhu who was sitting next to him, and introduced. "Frank, this is Mr. Qinzhu Clean, my boss, and your future partner and boss." Oh, God, damn Chen, why didn't you tell me earlier? Frank quickly got rid of Chen Mu, tidied his clothes, and wanted to give Qinzu a warm big bear hug. Stop, don't come over here. Qinzu stood up quickly in fear. He didn't dare to let this guy hug him. Seeing how excited he was, he estimated that if he did that, his life would be half in danger. Fin DS capture much as great as Pelaga has to L final. No SE indeed all like bus gasms contenido exclusive YXO in medito. Siascravata news to Patreon. Recurada, card alike, Siascripsino Donakin nos anima continue. Great as a todos nos vemos on Elpsmodo.